Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I've been carrying a badge for 23 years now, and I can tell you that most calls blur together after a while. Domestic disturbances, fender benders, kids spray painting bridges, they all start to feel like variations on the same theme. But there's one call that still sits with me, heavy as a stone in my chest. It was a welfare check, simple as that. At least, that's what dispatch told us. It was October of 2019. I remember because the leaves were just starting to turn, and there was that first real bite of autumn in the air. I was working nights then, partnered with Officer Julie Martinez. She was maybe 6 years in, good instincts, didn't talk your ear off during the long stretches between calls. We'd been cruising the quieter neighborhoods on the east side when dispatch crackled through around 2:47 a.m. Unit 23, we have a welfare check requested at 1247 Maple Grove Circle. Caller reports concern for elderly neighbor who hasn't been seen in several days. Mail piling up, newspapers not collected. Martinez picked up the radio. Copy that, dispatch. Unit 23, responding to 1247 Maple Grove Circle. 10-4, Unit 23. Caller is Mrs. Dorothy Henley, 1251 Maple Grove Circle. She's waiting for your arrival. I knew the area. Maple Grove Circle was one of those curved suburban streets where the houses all looked like they'd been stamped from the same mold back in the 70s. Ranch-style homes with small front yards, attached garages, the kind of place where people knew their neighbors' names and left their doors unlocked, or used to anyway. The drive took us about 12 minutes. Not much traffic that time of night, just the occasional late-shift worker heading home or some kid testing curfew. Martinez drummed her fingers on the steering wheel as we turned into the subdivision. The streetlights cast these long shadows between the houses, and I could see jack-o'-lanterns glowing on a few porches. Halloween was still a week away. You ever do a welfare check that actually turned out to be nothing? Martinez asked as we slowed down, looking for house numbers. Few times, I said. Usually it's exactly what it looks like. Person went to visit family, forgot to mention it to the neighbors. Or they're sick, stayed inside a few days. But sometimes it's not. We pulled up in front of 1247. The house was dark except for a porch light that flickered like it had a loose connection. I could see what Mrs. Henley was talking about. There were newspapers scattered on the walkway, and the mailbox was stuffed so full that some envelopes had fallen to the ground. Martinez killed the engine, and we sat there for a moment just taking it in. The house next door, 1251, had lights on in the front window. I could see a woman's silhouette moving behind the curtains. That would be Mrs. Henley, probably watching for us. All right, I said, checking my watch. Let's go talk to the neighbor first, get the details. Mrs. Dorothy Henley was exactly what you'd expect from a concerned neighbor making a welfare check request. Maybe 75, wearing a housecoat and slippers, her gray hair in curlers. She'd been waiting by the door and opened it before we even knocked. "Oh, thank goodness you're here," she said, stepping aside to let us in. "I've been so worried about Eleanor. That's Eleanor Kassler next door. She's lived there for, it must be 15 years now." We followed her into a living room that smelled like lavender and old books. Family photos covered every surface, and a muted television was showing some late-night movie. Martinez took out her notebook. "When did you last see Mrs. Kassler, ma'am?" Martinez asked. "Well, that's just it. I can't remember exactly. I think it was maybe Thursday or Wednesday. She usually waters her plants every morning around 8, and I always wave to her from my kitchen window, but I haven't seen her in days." "And you mentioned mail piling up?" "Yes, and newspapers. Eleanor always brings her paper in right after the delivery boy comes by. She's very particular about that. Says she doesn't want it to get wet if it rains." I was looking out Mrs. Henley's front window at the Kassler house. The porch light was still flickering, but I could see into the front yard clearly enough. There had to be at least 4 or 5 newspapers scattered around, and like she'd said, the mailbox was overflowing. "Has Mrs. Kassler mentioned any trips? Family visits?" I asked. "No, nothing like that. Eleanor doesn't travel much. Her daughter lives in California, but she never visits. They don't get along very well." "Any health issues we should know about?" Mrs. Henley paused, wrapping her housecoat tighter around herself. "Eleanor's been having some memory problems lately. Nothing too serious, but sometimes she gets confused about things. Last month, she called me at 3 in the morning asking if I'd seen her cat. She doesn't have a cat." Martinez and I exchanged a glance. Elderly person, possible dementia symptoms, not seen for several days. It was starting to paint a picture, and not a particularly good one. "Any other family, friends who might check on her?" "Not really. Eleanor keeps to herself mostly. She's not the warmest person, if you know what I mean. But she's not a bad neighbor, just private." I stood up, looking toward the window again. "Mrs. Henley, we're going to go check on Mrs. Kassler now. You should probably stay inside until we know what's going on." "Of course, I hope she's all right." As we walked back to our cruiser, Martinez spoke quietly. "What do you think?" "Could be anything. Could be nothing. Could be she fell and can't get up. Could be she wandered off and got lost. I didn't mention what else it could be." Martinez had been doing this long enough to know. We parked in the Kassler driveway and approached the front door. The porch light's flickering was even more annoying up close, casting these stuttering shadows across the welcome mat. I knocked firmly, but not aggressively. When you're doing a welfare check, you don't want to scare someone who might just be sleeping. "Mrs. Kassler, police department, we're here to check on you." Nothing. Martinez tried the doorbell. We could hear it chiming inside, but no response. I knocked again, harder this time. "Eleanor Kassler, this is Officer Williams with the police department. Your neighbor asked us to check on you." We waited. Still nothing. "Let's try the back," I said. The backyard was accessed through a wooden gate on the side of the house. It was latched, but not locked. The yard was small and well-maintained. A few flower beds, a small patio with a glass-top table, and a bird feeder hanging from a maple tree. The back door was a sliding glass door that led into what looked like a kitchen. I cupped my hands against the glass and peered inside. The kitchen was neat, no obvious signs of disturbance. A coffee mug sat on the counter next to the sink, and I could see the red light of a digital clock on the microwave. "Mrs. Kassler?" I called out, tapping on the glass. "Police department." Martinez was trying to see through a window on the other side of the patio. I can see into the living room. Television's on, but no one's there. I tried the sliding door. It was unlocked and slid open easily. It should have been the first real warning sign, but at the time, I just thought it was lucky. Made our job easier. "Mrs. Kassler, we're police officers. We're here because your neighbor was worried about you." The kitchen was exactly as it had appeared from outside. Clean, organized, but there was something off about it that I couldn't quite place. The coffee mug on the counter was empty but stained, like it had been sitting there for a while. There was a slight smell in the air, not bad exactly, but stale, like a house that hadn't been aired out in too long. We moved into the living room. The television was on, showing some infomercial about kitchen knives. The sound was muted. A recliner chair faced the TV, and there was a TV guide open on the side table, along with a pair of reading glasses. "Mrs. Kassler," Martinez called out. "We're here to help." "Let's check the bedrooms," I said. The house had a simple layout: kitchen, living room, 2 bedrooms, and a bathroom, all connected by a short hallway. The first bedroom appeared to be a guest room. Bed made, no personal items, a thin layer of dust on the dresser. The bathroom was between the 2 bedrooms, also clean and tidy. The master bedroom was at the end of the hall. The door was closed. I knocked gently. "Mrs. Kassler, it's the police. We're here to make sure you're okay." No answer. I turned the handle and pushed the door open slowly. The room was dark except for light filtering in from the hallway. I could make out the shape of a bed, a dresser, and a chair in the corner. "Mrs. Kassler?" Martinez found the light switch and flipped it on. The bedroom was empty. The bed was made, but it had that same stale smell as the rest of the house, maybe a little stronger. I checked the closet and under the bed, though I'm not sure what I expected to find. "So, where is she?" Martinez asked. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. On the nightstand next to the bed was a pill organizer, one of those plastic containers with compartments for each day of the week. It was full. Every compartment had pills in it, and according to the labels, they were heart medication and blood pressure medication. The kind of pills you don't skip. "Look at this," I said, pointing to the organizer. Martinez came over and examined it. "These are dated from last week. If she's been taking her medication, she should have been taking pills from this week's organizer. Unless she hasn't been taking them at all." We searched the rest of the bedroom more thoroughly. In the dresser drawers, we found something else troubling. Eleanor Kassler's purse was there, with her wallet, credit cards, and car keys still inside. Her car keys. "Martinez, let's check the garage." The garage was accessed through a door in the kitchen. I flipped the light switch and a fluorescent bulb flickered to life, humming softly. Eleanor Kassler's car was there, a blue Honda Civic, maybe 10 years old, parked neatly in the center of the garage. The hood was cold when I touched it. "Hasn't been driven recently," I said. Martinez was looking around the garage. It was organized like the rest of the house. Tools hanging on pegboards, shelves lined with paint cans and gardening supplies, everything in its place. But there was something that caught her attention. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the floor near the back of the garage. There were scuff marks on the concrete, like something heavy had been dragged across it. The marks led from the center of the garage toward the back wall, where there was a door that I assumed led to the backyard. I tried the back door. It was unlocked, and it opened onto a small area behind the garage that was hidden from the neighbor's view by a tall privacy fence. The area was mostly empty, except for garbage cans and a garden hose coiled on a hook. "What do you think made those marks?" Martinez asked. I didn't answer right away. I was thinking about the timeline. Mrs. Henley hadn't seen Eleanor for several days, but she couldn't remember exactly when. The pill organizer suggested she hadn't taken her medication in at least a week. The coffee mug in the kitchen looked like it had been sitting there for a while. "We need to call this in," I said. "Request a detective." "You think something happened to her?" "I think we need to treat this as more than a welfare check." We went back inside, and I used my radio to contact dispatch. "Unit 23 to dispatch." "Go ahead, Unit 23. We're at 1247 Maple Grove Circle. Need a detective to respond to our location. Possible missing person. Copy that, Unit 23, Detective Unit en route. While we waited, Martinez and I did another walkthrough of the house, this time more systematically. In the kitchen, I found a calendar on the refrigerator. The last entry was from 2 weeks ago. Doctor appointment 2:30 p.m. Nothing after that. In the living room, I noticed something I'd missed the first time. The TV guide on the side table was open to the previous week's listings, and there was a glass of water on the coffee table, but it was empty except for a ring of residue at the bottom. "Martinez, look at this." She came over and examined the glass. Looks like it's been sitting there for days. Everything in this house feels frozen in time, like she just stopped. The detective arrived about 20 minutes later. Detective Ray Kowalski was a 15-year veteran with the kind of mustache that went out of style in the 80s but somehow looked right on him. He was thorough and methodical, which I appreciated. "Talk to me," he said as he walked through the front door. I gave him the rundown, the neighbor's call, the piled-up mail, the unlocked back door, the unused medication, the scuff marks in the garage. He listened without interrupting, taking notes in a small spiral notebook. "Any signs of forced entry?" he asked. Number back door was unlocked. Front door was secure. "Any obvious signs of struggle?" "Nothing obvious, but there's something off about the whole place. Like she just vanished in the middle of her normal routine." Detective Kowalski nodded. "Let's take another look at that garage." The three of us stood in the garage, looking at the scuff marks on the concrete floor. In the harsh fluorescent light, they were even more noticeable. 2 parallel lines that ran from the center of the garage to the back door. "Could be from moving furniture," Detective Kowalski said, but he didn't sound convinced. "What furniture?" Martinez asked. "The house is fully furnished." Detective Kowalski knelt down and examined the marks more closely. "These are fresh. Look at the concrete dust along the edges. This happened recently." He stood up and looked around the garage again. "What's in that corner?" In the far corner of the garage, behind the car, was a workbench with a few tools scattered on it. Nothing unusual, except for a small area of the floor that looked like it had been cleaned recently. The concrete there was a slightly different shade, like it had been scrubbed. "Someone cleaned this spot," the detective said. "But why just this one area?" I was starting to get a bad feeling about this whole situation. Eleanor Kassler was missing, but her car was in the garage, her purse was in the bedroom, and her medication was sitting unused on the nightstand. The house showed no signs of forced entry, but there were drag marks on the garage floor and a suspiciously clean spot of concrete. "Detective, I think we need to expand this investigation." "Agreed. I'm going to call for a crime scene unit. In the meantime, I want you two to canvass the neighborhood. Talk to every neighbor on this street, find out when they last saw Eleanor Kassler, if they noticed anything unusual, any strange cars or people in the area." "What about Mrs. Henley?" Martinez asked. "I'll talk to her after the crime scene unit gets here. She might have seen more than she realizes." As we walked back toward our cruiser, Martinez was quiet. Finally, she said, "You think she's dead, don't you?" "I think someone went to a lot of trouble to make it look like she just wandered off. But people don't just disappear from their homes, leaving everything behind. So, what happened to her?" I looked back at the house. The flickering porch light was still strobing, casting those stuttering shadows across the front yard. "I don't know, but I'm starting to think we're not going to like the answer." We started with the house directly across the street. The porch light was on, and I could see someone moving around inside. A man in his 50s answered the door, wearing a bathrobe and looking annoyed about being woken up. "Police," I said, showing my badge. "We're investigating a missing person case. Your neighbor, Eleanor Kassler." The man's expression changed. "Eleanor? Is she all right?" "That's what we're trying to find out." "When did you last see her?" He thought for a moment. "I don't really pay attention to the neighbors, you know. But I think it was maybe last week. She was getting her mail." "Did you notice anything unusual recently? Strange cars? People you didn't recognize?" "No, nothing like that. Eleanor keeps to herself mostly. We wave when we see each other, but that's about it." "What about last weekend? Any activity at her house?" "Last weekend?" He paused. "Actually, yeah. There was a van parked in her driveway on Saturday. I only noticed because it was there for a while." Martinez leaned forward. "What kind of van?" "White panel van. I thought maybe she was having some work done on the house, but it was there pretty late, like after dark." "Did you see anyone with the van?" "No, I didn't really pay attention. Like I said, Eleanor keeps to herself." We thanked him and moved on to the next house. The pattern was the same. Most neighbors hadn't seen Eleanor in days, maybe a week. But 2 more people mentioned seeing a white van in her driveway sometime over the weekend. By the time we finished canvassing the street, it was nearly 6 a.m. The crime scene unit had arrived and was processing Eleanor Kassler's house and garage. Detective Kowalski met us at our cruiser. "What did you find?" he asked. 3 neighbors saw a white panel van in her driveway over the weekend," I said. "Parked there for several hours, at least one sighting after dark." "Any description of the driver?" "Nobody got a good look, but one neighbor said they thought they saw 2 people near the van around midnight Saturday." Detective Kowalski nodded grimly. "Crime scene found something interesting in the garage. There are traces of bleach on that clean spot of concrete. Someone tried to clean up something, and they used bleach to do it." "Blood?" Martinez asked. "That's what we're thinking. We won't know for sure until we get the lab results back, but it's looking more and more like Mrs. Kassler didn't just wander off." "So, what's the theory?" I asked. "Working theory is that someone came to her house, possibly on Saturday night based on the van sightings. Something happened to her, and they cleaned up evidence in the garage before removing her from the house." "But why?" "Eleanor Kassler was a 70-something woman who kept to herself. Who would want to hurt her? That's what we need to find out. I'm going to need you to stay on this case, help me with the investigation." The next few days were a blur of interviews and evidence collection. We talked to Eleanor's doctor, who confirmed that she had been having increasing memory problems, but was still living independently. We spoke to her daughter in California, who hadn't talked to her mother in months due to some family dispute that neither seemed able to articulate clearly. We checked Eleanor's bank records and found nothing unusual. No large withdrawals, no suspicious transactions. Her credit cards hadn't been used since the previous Thursday, when she'd bought groceries at the local supermarket. The grocery store's security footage showed Eleanor shopping alone, moving slowly through the aisles, checking items off a handwritten list. She looked frail but functional. The timestamp showed she'd been there at 3:47 p.m. on Thursday. That was the last confirmed sighting of Eleanor Kassler. So, someone took her between Thursday afternoon and Saturday night, Detective Kowalski said as we reviewed the timeline. Question is, who and why? And how did they get her to let them into the house? I added. Remember, there was no sign of forced entry. Maybe she knew them, or maybe they posed as someone she would trust. Like who? Delivery person, repairman, someone from a utility company, or ... Or what? Detective Kowalski looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. What if it was someone in a uniform? The thought sent a chill down my spine. I'd been a cop long enough to know that people trust uniforms, sometimes more than they should. If someone had shown up at Eleanor's door wearing a police uniform, or an EMT uniform, or even a utility worker's uniform, she would have let them in without question. "We need to check with local companies," I said. "See if anyone had legitimate business at her house that weekend." "Already on it," Detective Kowalski said. "No scheduled repairs, no deliveries, no utility work, nothing." Over the next week, the investigation expanded. We put out a bolo for the white van, but with no license plate number and only a vague description. It was a long shot. We interviewed everyone who had any connection to Eleanor Kassler, her doctor, her pharmacist, her neighbors, the clerk at the grocery store where she shopped. Nothing. It was like she had simply vanished into thin air. But then, on a Tuesday morning about 10 days after the initial welfare check, Detective Kowalski called me at home. "We need to talk," he said. "Something's come up." I met Detective Kowalski at a diner on the outskirts of town. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of coffee and a manila folder in front of him. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "What's going on?" I asked, sliding into the booth across from him. "Remember I told you we put out a BOLO for that white van?" "Yeah." "Well, we got a hit, sort of." He opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. This was taken by a traffic camera on Highway 34, about 15 miles east of town. Saturday night, 11:47 p.m. The photo showed a white panel van driving east on the highway. The license plate was partially obscured by mud, but I could make out a few letters. "We ran the partial plate through the system," Detective Kowalski continued. 3 possible matches. 2 of them are accounted for. One belongs to a plumber who was working a job across town that night, the other to a florist who was at home with his family. "And the third?" "The third is registered to a company called Mercy Medical Transport. They provide non-emergency medical transport for elderly and disabled patients." "Medical transport," I said slowly. "Someone Eleanor would trust. Someone she might let into her house. That's what I'm thinking. But here's the thing. I called Mercy Medical Transport. They say they had no scheduled pickups in our area that weekend, and their van was supposed to be parked at their facility all weekend. So either they're lying, or someone stole their van, or someone who works for them used it for their own purposes." Detective Kowalski pulled out another document. "I got the employee list from Mercy Medical Transport. 12 employees total, drivers, dispatchers, a couple of EMTs. I want you to help me interview them." "When do we start?" "Now." Mercy Medical Transport operated out of a small office building on the industrial side of town. The building was older, with a parking lot full of potholes and a sign that had seen better days. 3 white vans were parked in the lot, identical to the one in the traffic camera photo. The owner, a man named Frank Delacroix, was cooperative but nervous. He kept wringing his hands and apologizing for things that weren't his fault. "I can't believe one of my vans was involved in something like this," he said as he led us to his office. "We're a legitimate business. We help people. We're not accusing you of anything, Mr. Delacroix," Detective Kowalski said. "We just need to talk to your employees." Of course. Anything you need." The employee interviews were conducted in a small conference room that smelled like stale coffee and industrial carpet. One by one, Detective Kowalski and I talked to each of the 12 employees. Most of them were exactly what you'd expect. Working-class people trying to make a living in a difficult job, transporting elderly and disabled patients to medical appointments. But there was one who stood out. His name was Marcus Webb, and he was a driver who had been with the company for about 6 months. He was in his 30s, average height, with the kind of bland, forgettable face that would blend in anywhere. But there was something in his eyes. a coldness that made me uncomfortable. "Where were you last Saturday night, Marcus?" Detective Kowalski asked. "Home. Watching TV. Anyone who can verify that?" "I live alone." "What were you watching?" Marcus paused just a fraction too long. "I don't remember. Some movie." "Do you know Eleanor Kassler?" "Never heard of her." "She lived at 1247 Maple Grove Circle." "You sure you've never been to that address?" I'm sure." Detective Kowalski showed him the traffic camera photo. "This is one of your company's vans on Highway 34 last Saturday night. You know anything about that?" Marcus looked at the photo for a long time. "Could be anyone driving it. All our vans look the same." "That's true. But this van was driven by someone who had access to your company's vehicles. Someone who knew how to operate the equipment." "I don't know what you're talking about." The interview continued for another 20 minutes, but Marcus Webb stuck to his story. He didn't know Eleanor Kassler. He was home watching TV on Saturday night, and he had no idea who might have taken one of the company's vans. But there was something about his demeanor that bothered me. He was too calm, too controlled. Most people, when being questioned by police about a missing person case, show some emotion. Concern, curiosity, nervousness. Marcus Webb showed nothing. After the interview, Detective Kowalski and I stepped outside to talk. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think he's lying." "Yeah, me too, but lying about what?" "I don't know, but I think we should keep an eye on him." We started surveillance on Marcus Webb the next day. It was unofficial. Detective Kowalski couldn't justify the overtime for a formal surveillance operation based on a gut feeling. But both of us felt like Webb was hiding something, so we took turns watching him during our off hours. Webb lived in a small apartment complex on the south side of town. The building was maybe 30 years old, with a parking lot full of old cars and a dumpster that looked like it hadn't been emptied in a week. Webb's apartment was on the second floor, with a view of the parking lot and the street beyond. For the first 3 days, he followed the same routine. Up at 6 a.m., coffee at a gas station on the way to work, 8-hour shift driving patients to medical appointments, home by 7 p.m., didn't leave again until the next morning. But on Thursday night, something changed. I was parked across the street from Webb's apartment building, drinking coffee from a thermos and trying to stay awake, when I saw him come out of the building at 11:30 p.m. He was dressed in dark clothes and carrying a small bag. He got into his personal car, a beat-up sedan that looked like it should have been scrapped years ago, and drove away. I followed him, keeping my distance. Webb drove east out of town toward the highway. He was driving carefully, staying at or below the speed limit, signaling for every turn, like someone who didn't want to be pulled over. After about 20 minutes, he turned off the highway onto a rural road that I didn't recognize. The road was narrow and dark, with no streetlights and thick woods on both sides. I had to drop back further to avoid being spotted. Webb's car eventually turned into what looked like an abandoned industrial complex. There were several buildings, all dark and empty-looking. I parked on the road and watched as Webb got out of his car and walked toward one of the buildings. The building was maybe 3 stories tall, with broken windows and graffiti on the walls. Webb used a key to unlock a side door and disappeared inside. A few minutes later, I saw a light come on in one of the windows on the second floor. I waited and waited. Webb was inside the building for almost 2 hours. When he finally came out, he was no longer carrying the bag he'd had when he went in. I followed him back to his apartment, but I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about that abandoned building, about what Webb might have been doing there for 2 hours in the middle of the night. The next morning, I called Detective Kowalski and told him what I'd seen. "We need to check out that building," he said. Agreed, but we should probably get a warrant. What's our probable cause? Suspicious behavior by a person of interest in a missing person case. That's pretty thin. It's what we have. Detective Kowalski was quiet for a moment. Let me make some calls. See if I can find out who owns that building, whether there's been any other suspicious activity reported there. While he worked on that, I drove back to the industrial complex in daylight. It looked even more abandoned than it had the night before. The buildings were obviously empty, with weeds growing through cracks in the parking lot and rust stains running down the walls. I walked around the building where I'd seen Webb go in. Most of the windows were broken, and the ones that weren't were covered with plywood. But the side door Webb had used looked newer than the rest of the building, and there was a recently installed lock. I was about to leave when I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was faint, but it sounded like someone calling for help. I moved closer to the building, trying to locate the source of the sound. It seemed to be coming from somewhere inside, maybe from the second floor where I'd seen the light the night before. I called Detective Kowalski. I'm at the building. I think I hear someone inside. Someone calling for help? I think so. It's hard to tell. That's exigent circumstances. We don't need a warrant if someone's life is in danger. I'm going in. Wait for backup. I'm on my way. But as I stood there listening, the sound came again. Weak and desperate. Someone was definitely inside that building and they were in trouble. I couldn't wait for backup. I tried the side door first. It was locked, but it was also old and not particularly sturdy. I put my shoulder into it and felt the frame give way. The door swung open and I stepped inside. The building was dark and smelled like mold and decay. I used my flashlight to navigate through what looked like an old factory floor. Machinery covered in dust and rust, electrical cables hanging from the ceiling, broken glass crunching under my feet. I could hear the sound more clearly now. It was definitely someone calling for help, and it was coming from upstairs. I found a staircase and climbed carefully, testing each step before putting my full weight on it. The second floor was laid out differently than the first. Smaller rooms, like offices or storage areas. I could see light coming from under a door at the end of the hallway. "Hello," I called out. "Police department, is someone there?" The calling stopped. Then, very faintly, I heard a woman's voice. "Help me. Please, help me." I moved toward the voice, my hand on my weapon. The door at the end of the hallway was partly open, and I could see that the room beyond was lit by a battery-powered lantern. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Eleanor Kassler was there. She was sitting in a chair in the center of the room, her hands tied behind her back. She was alive, but she looked terrible. Thin, pale, with dark circles under her eyes. She'd obviously been there for days. "Mrs. Kassler," I said, moving toward her. "Are you hurt?" She looked at me with confusion and fear. "Who are you?" "I'm Officer Williams. I'm with the police. We've been looking for you." "Police?" She started to cry. "I don't understand what's happening. This man, he came to my house. He said he was taking me to the hospital, but then he brought me here." I was untying her hands when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy boots, moving quickly. "Mrs. Kassler, we need to get you out of here," I said urgently. But it was too late. Marcus Webb appeared in the doorway, and he was holding a gun. "Step away from her," he said calmly. I raised my hands but didn't move. "Marcus, you don't want to do this. You shouldn't have come here alone. Detective Kowalski knows where I am. He's on his way." Webb smiled, but it was a cold, empty expression. "No, he's not. I've been monitoring police radio frequencies. No one's coming." "Why are you doing this, Marcus?" "What do you want with Mrs. Kassler?" It's not about what I want, it's about what she has. What are you talking about? Eleanor spoke up, her voice weak but angry. He thinks I have money. He keeps asking me about my bank accounts, my investments. But I don't have any money. I live on Social Security. Webb's expression darkened. You're lying. I know you have money. I've seen your house, your car. You're hiding it from me. I'm telling you the truth, Eleanor said. I don't have any money. I could see Webb's grip tightening on the gun. He was getting frustrated, and frustrated people with guns make bad decisions. Marcus, listen to me, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. This has gone too far. Mrs. Kassler needs medical attention. Let me call an ambulance. Shut up. Webb's voice was sharper now. You don't understand. I've been watching her for months, following her routine, learning her habits. She has to have money somewhere. Following her? Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. That's right, Eleanor. Every Thursday when you went to the grocery store. Every morning when you watered your plants. I knew everything about you before I ever knocked on your door. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Webb worked for a medical transport company, which gave him access to information about elderly patients. He would have known who lived alone, who might be vulnerable, who might have assets worth stealing. How many others? I asked. Webb looked at me with that same cold smile. Others? How many other people have you done this to? You think Eleanor's the first? She's just the first one who wouldn't cooperate? My stomach dropped. What happened to the others? They were smarter than Eleanor. They told me where their money was. And then what? Webb didn't answer, but his expression told me everything I needed to know. You killed them. I didn't want to, but they could identify me. They knew who I was. Eleanor started crying again. Oh God, oh God. I was trying to think of a way out of this situation. Webb was standing in the doorway, blocking the only exit. He had a gun pointed at me, and Eleanor was too weak to run. Even if I could overpower Webb, there was a good chance Eleanor would get hurt in the struggle. Marcus, you're making this worse for yourself, I said. Right now, you're looking at kidnapping charges, maybe theft. But if you hurt us, it becomes murder. It's already murder, Webb said. I told you, Eleanor's not the first. Then, help yourself. Cooperate with us. Tell us where the others are. Maybe we can work something out. Webb laughed, but there was no humor in it. Work something out? You think I'm stupid? I know how this ends. That's when I heard it, the distant sound of car doors slamming. Detective Kowalski had arrived, probably with backup. Webb heard it too. His head turned slightly toward the window and I saw my chance. I lunged forward, grabbing for his gun hand. We went down hard, wrestling on the floor. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the small room. Eleanor screamed. I managed to get on top of Webb and pin his gun hand to the floor. He was stronger than he looked, but I had training and adrenaline on my side. Eleanor, are you hit? I called out. No, I'm okay. I could hear footsteps running up the stairs. In here, I shouted. Suspect down. Detective Kowalski burst through the door with 2 patrol officers behind him. They secured Webb while I checked on Eleanor. It's over, I told her. You're safe now. But as I looked at her, this frail, elderly woman who had been terrorized for days by someone she had trusted, I realized it wasn't really over, not for her, maybe not for any of us. The aftermath of Marcus Webb's arrest was like peeling back layers of an infected wound. Each new piece of information we uncovered made the case worse, more disturbing. Webb confessed to everything once he realized the evidence against him was overwhelming. He'd been using his position at Mercy Medical Transport to identify potential victims. Elderly patients who lived alone, who seemed to have assets but limited family support. His method was simple and effective. He would show up at their homes in the Mercy medical van, wearing a uniform, claiming there had been a change in their medical appointments, or that their doctor had requested an emergency transport. Most elderly people, especially those with memory issues, would trust the uniform and go with him without question. He'd taken them to the abandoned industrial complex, where he'd set up what he called his interview room. He would keep them there until they told him where they kept their money, their bank account information, anything of value. Most of them, terrified and confused, would eventually give him what he wanted. How many? Detective Kowalski asked during one of the interrogations. Webb was quiet for a long time. Then he said, 7. 7 people? Including Eleanor. What happened to the other 6? Another long pause. They're not around anymore. The search for the bodies took 3 weeks. Webb eventually led us to 6 different locations around the county. Some buried in wooded areas, others dumped in remote lakes or ravines. All elderly, all living alone. All people who had simply vanished from their lives without anyone noticing for days or sometimes weeks. The oldest victim was 84. The youngest was 67. Their names were Margaret Chen, Robert Torres, Helen Adamczyk, Frank Morrison, Dorothy Price, and James Kelly. Webb had stolen a total of about $180,000 from them. Money from bank accounts, jewelry, anything he could convert to cash. Eleanor Kassler survived because she genuinely didn't have any significant assets. She lived on Social Security and a small pension, barely making ends meet. When Webb couldn't get what he wanted from her, he'd kept her alive, hoping she would eventually remember some hidden account or valuable possession. The trial was straightforward. Webb pleaded guilty to 6 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of kidnapping, multiple counts of theft and fraud. The judge gave him life without parole, which seemed appropriate given that he'd shown no remorse for any of it. But for me, the case didn't end with Webb's conviction. Eleanor Kassler never recovered from her ordeal. The doctors said she was physically okay, just malnourished and dehydrated. But psychologically, something had broken. She developed severe anxiety and paranoia. She couldn't be alone in her house anymore. She jumped at every unexpected sound, refused to answer the door, stopped going to the grocery store. Her daughter finally came from California to take care of her, but Eleanor died less than a year later. The doctors said it was heart failure, but I think she died of fear. Webb had taken her sense of safety, her ability to trust, and without those things she just couldn't function anymore. I attended her funeral. There were maybe 20 people there, some neighbors, a few people from her church, her daughter and son-in-law. Detective Kowalski came too. We didn't talk much, but I think we both felt the weight of it. After the service, Mrs. Henley, the neighbor who had called in the welfare check, came up to me. "Officer Williams," she said, "I wanted to thank you for finding Eleanor. I wish we'd found her sooner. You found her alive. That's what matters." But as I drove home from the funeral, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't really saved Eleanor Kassler. We'd rescued her body, but Webb had already taken everything that made her who she was. I retired from the police force about 2 years after the Webb case. Not because of that case specifically, but it was part of a larger pattern of things that had been wearing me down. 23 years of seeing what people could do to each other. 23 years of arriving too late, of finding the damage already done. Martinez left too, around the same time. She took a job with the state police, working in their cybercrime unit. Fewer dead bodies, she told me. More spreadsheets and computer screens. Detective Kowalski stayed with the department. Last I heard, he'd been promoted to sergeant. We still talk occasionally, usually around the anniversary of the Webb arrest. He told me that he still thinks about Eleanor Kassler sometimes, wonders if we could have done something differently. We followed the evidence, I told him during one of those conversations. We did everything right. Then why does it still feel wrong? I didn't have an answer for that, still don't. The thing that haunts me most about the Webb case isn't the murders themselves, though those were bad enough. It's how easy it was for him to gain people's trust. He put on a uniform, drove an official-looking van, and spoke with authority. That was enough to get 6 elderly people to walk willingly to their deaths. It makes you think about trust, about the assumptions we make based on appearances. How many times have I relied on someone's uniform, their badge, their credentials, without really knowing who they were underneath? The uniform represents something powerful: safety, authority, protection. But it's just fabric and metal. The person wearing it could be anyone. I think about that sometimes when I see police officers now. Most of them are good people trying to do a difficult job, but some of them aren't. And the uniform makes it almost impossible to tell the difference until it's too late. Webb understood that. He weaponized the trust that people place in uniforms, in official vehicles, in the symbols of authority and protection. He turned that trust into a tool for predation. That's why I can't let go of this case even now, because it changed how I think about the badge I wore for 23 years. It changed how I think about the trust people placed in me because of that badge. Webb was sentenced to life in prison, but in a way, he got what he wanted. He destroyed something fundamental: the belief that uniforms and badges and official procedures meant safety. He proved that the very symbols we use to represent protection can be turned against us. The really disturbing part is that Webb wasn't unique. After his arrest, I started paying attention to similar cases around the country. People impersonating police officers, EMTs, utility workers, anyone whose uniform or credentials would get them inside people's homes. It happens more often than you'd think. The FBI estimates that there are dozens of active cases at any given time involving people who use false authority to commit crimes. Most of them don't go as far as Webb did, but the basic principle is the same. Exploit trust, exploit the assumptions people make about uniforms and official procedures. I live in a different town now, about 2 hours away from where I used to work. It's smaller, quieter. The kind of place where people still leave their doors unlocked and trust their neighbors. Or, at least, they used to. A few months ago, I was at the grocery store when I overheard a conversation between 2 elderly women. They were talking about a man who had come to one of their doors, claiming to be from the gas company, saying he needed to check for a leak. "Did you let him in?" one of them asked. "No," the other replied. "Something about him didn't seem right. He had a uniform and everything, but I don't know. I called the gas company instead. They said they hadn't sent anyone." I wanted to tell her she'd made the right choice. I wanted to tell her about Marcus Webb, about how easy it is for someone to put on a uniform and become whoever they want to be. But I didn't. I just paid for my groceries and left. But it made me think about Eleanor Kassler again. About how she'd opened her door to Webb because he was wearing a uniform and driving an official-looking van. About how that simple act of trust had cost her everything. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Mrs. Henley hadn't called in that welfare check. How long would Webb have kept Eleanor alive? How long before he gave up on finding money that didn't exist and decided to eliminate the only witness to his crimes? Or maybe he never would have killed her. Maybe he would have kept her indefinitely, hoping she would eventually remember some hidden asset. Maybe she would have died in that abandoned building, forgotten and alone. The thought keeps me awake sometimes. I think about all the other Eleanor Kasslers out there, elderly people living alone, trusting the uniforms and badges and credentials that show up at their doors. Most of the time, those uniforms represent the people they're supposed to represent. Most of the time, trust is rewarded with genuine help and protection, but not always. Webb taught me that the uniform is just a costume. The badge is just a piece of metal. The real test of someone's character isn't what they're wearing, but what they do when no one is watching, when there are no consequences, when they have power over someone vulnerable. The scariest part of the Webb case wasn't the murders themselves. It was how normal he seemed, how easily he fit into the role of helpful medical transport driver. His co-workers liked him. His supervisors thought he was reliable. Even during our investigation, before we knew what he'd done, he came across as just another working guy trying to make a living. Evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it wears a uniform and speaks politely and offers to help. Sometimes it drives an official-looking van and carries legitimate-seeming credentials. Sometimes it knocks on your door at night and asks you to trust it. I'm telling you this story because I think it's important for people to know. Not to make you paranoid or distrustful, but to make you careful. To make you think twice before automatically trusting someone just because of what they're wearing or what kind of vehicle they're driving. Eleanor Kassler trusted a uniform, and it cost her everything. 6 other people made the same mistake, and it cost them their lives. But Eleanor's story isn't just about her. It's about all of us who wear uniform, who carry badges, who ask for people's trust based on symbols and credentials rather than character. It's a reminder that trust is a responsibility, not a right. Every time someone opens their door to a police officer, every time someone gets into an ambulance, every time someone trusts a uniform, they're making themselves vulnerable. Most of the time, that trust is justified. The uniform represents someone who genuinely wants to help and protect. But not always. That's the burden we carry when we put on a uniform. That's the responsibility that comes with the badge. People trust us not because they know us personally, but because of what we represent. And that trust can be the difference between life and death. Marcus Webb understood that. He exploited it. He turned protection into predation, help into harm. I've been retired for several years now, but I still think about the Webb case almost every day. Not because of what he did exactly, but because of what he represents. The possibility that anyone, anywhere, can put on a uniform and become someone they're not. The next time someone in a uniform shows up at your door unexpectedly, ask for identification. Call their supervisor. Verify their credentials independently. Don't just trust the uniform. Eleanor Kassler would still be alive if she'd done that. And maybe, just maybe, 6 other people would be too. The hardest part about being a police officer isn't the danger, or the long hours, or the difficult situations you have to deal with. It's knowing that every time you put on the uniform, you're representing something larger than yourself. You're carrying the trust and faith that people place in symbols of authority and protection. Most officers understand that responsibility and take it seriously, but some don't. And until we figure out how to tell the difference, stories like Eleanor Kassler's will keep happening. That's the real horror of the Webb case. Not that it happened, but that it could happen again. Tomorrow. To anyone. By anyone wearing the right uniform and saying the right words. Trust, but verify. It might save your life. 28 years I've been answering calls through this radio, and I thought I'd heard everything. Domestic violence at 3 in the morning, overdoses behind strip malls, car accidents where the screaming metal sounds like something dying. But nothing prepared me for the call that came through on October 13th, 2023, at exactly 3:33 a.m. I remember the time because I was staring at the dispatch board clock when the static started, and when it cleared, everything changed. My name is Detective Ray Morrison, and I work the graveyard shift for the Millbrook County Sheriff's Department. It's a quiet county, mostly farmland and small towns scattered between patches of old-growth forest that nobody bothers to develop. The kind of place where the biggest crime is usually teenagers drinking beer behind the high school, or someone's cattle getting loose on Highway 9. Most nights, I spend my time doing paperwork and listening to the scanner chatter from neighboring counties, waiting for something interesting to happen. That night started like any other. I'd been on duty since 11, nursing my third cup of coffee and reading incident reports from the day shift. Officer Sandra Vega was working patrol, covering the northern sector where the population gets thin and the houses sit miles apart from each other. She'd called in twice already. Once for a fender bender near the truck stop. Once to check on a broken streetlight that was strobing and bothering residents. Standard stuff. The dispatch center sits in the basement of the county courthouse. A cramped room filled with radio equipment, computer monitors, and the constant hum of fluorescent lights. I've worked down here so long that I barely notice the smell anymore. Stale coffee, industrial carpet, and that particular odor that old buildings develop after decades of people working in them day and night. There are 3 dispatch stations, but on the midnight shift, it's usually just me unless something big happens. The radio had been quiet for almost an hour when the static started. At first, I thought it was interference from the storm system that had been moving through the area all week. We'd been getting scattered reports of communication problems, cell towers going down, weird atmospheric conditions affecting radio transmissions. But this static was different. It had a pattern to it, almost like Morse code, but not quite. More like someone tapping their fingers against a microphone in a rhythm that almost made sense but never quite resolved into anything you could understand. I was reaching for the radio to check the frequency when Sandra's voice cut through the interference, but it sounded wrong. Distant and hollow, like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. Dispatch, this is Unit 7. I need backup at 4847 Old Mill Road. Something's not right here. I grabbed the microphone. Unit 7, this is dispatch. What's your situation? I'm at the Hendricks property. Got a call about someone trespassing, but the caller's been dead for 6 years. Static filled the channel again, that same rhythmic pattern. I checked my log. There was no record of any call coming in about the Hendricks property. No record of any call at all for the past hour and 15 minutes. Unit 7, repeat your last transmission. I show no record of a trespassing call. Dispatch, I'm telling you, Mrs. Ruth Hendricks called in 20 minutes ago reporting someone walking around her property with a flashlight. She gave me her address as 4847 Old Mill Road. But Ray, Mrs. Hendricks, died in a car accident in 2017. I remember because I worked that crash. The coffee cup in my hand suddenly felt too heavy. I set it down carefully, my mind racing through possibilities. Sandra had been on the force for 8 years. Good officer. No history of psychological problems or substance abuse. She wasn't the type to make up stories or let stress get to her. But she was claiming she'd received a call from a dead woman. Unit 7, are you certain about the caller identification? Ray, she knew my name. She called me Officer Vega and said she'd met me before. She sounded exactly like I remember her voice from when I used to patrol this area 6 years ago. Same accent, same way of speaking. She said there was a man with a flashlight walking around her back pasture, and she was scared. I pulled up the county records database and searched for Ruth Hendricks. The file came up immediately. Age 73 at time of death, lived alone at 4847 Old Mill Road. died when her car went off the bridge during an ice storm in February 2017. No surviving family. Property had been empty since her death, tied up in probate court because she died without a will. Unit 7, the property has been vacant since 2017. Are you sure you're at the right address? I'm looking at the mailbox right now. 4847 Old Mill Road. And Ray, there are lights on in the house. That was impossible. The power had been shut off to the property years ago. The county had been trying to sell it to cover back taxes, but the house was in bad shape and nobody wanted to buy a place where someone had died. I'd driven past it myself maybe 6 months ago, and it had looked abandoned. Broken windows, weeds growing up through the porch. That particular look of emptiness that houses get when nobody's lived in them for too long. Unit 7. Describe what you're seeing. Lights in the front windows. Warm yellow light, like someone's home. The driveway looks like it's been maintained. No weeds or potholes. There's even a car in the driveway. Looks like an old Buick, maybe from the 80s or 90s. Blue or dark green, hard to tell in this light. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Ruth Hendricks had driven a 1987 Buick LeSabre, dark blue. It had been totaled in the accident. Unit 7, I need you to approach the house carefully. Do not enter without backup. I'm sending Unit 12 to your location. Ray, Unit 12 is Tom Bradley, right? He's covering the southern sector tonight. I checked the duty roster. Tom Bradley was indeed working Unit 12, but according to my records, he was supposed to be patrolling the industrial area near the county line, at least 40 minutes away from Old Mill Road. That's correct. Unit 12, respond to 4847 Old Mill Road to assist Unit 7. I waited for Tom's response, but the radio stayed quiet except for that rhythmic static. I tried again. Unit 12, this is dispatch. Please respond. Nothing. Unit 7, I'm not getting a response from Unit 12. Can you wait for backup before approaching the house? Ray, something's happening here. The lights in the house just went out all at once, and I can hear someone screaming. The screaming Sandra described wasn't coming through the radio. It was something she was hearing at the scene, but the way she described it made my skin crawl. She said it sounded like a woman's voice, high and desperate, but it seemed to be coming from inside the house and outside at the same time, like an echo that started before the original sound. Unit 7, get back to your vehicle and wait for backup. Do not approach the house. Ray, the screaming stopped. But now I can see someone moving around inside with a flashlight just like Mrs. Hendricks described. There's definitely someone in there. I was torn between protocol and practicality. By the book, Sandra should wait for backup before investigating a potential breaking and entering. But if someone was actually in the abandoned house, they could be gone by the time help arrived. And if someone was in distress, waiting could make the difference between life and death. Unit 7, use your discretion, but do not enter the house alone. If you see signs of immediate danger to a person, call for additional backup and wait. Copy that. Dispatch. I'm going to try to make contact. I tried raising Unit 12 again, but Tom Bradley wasn't responding. According to the GPS tracker, his unit was showing as being at the county garage, which didn't make sense. Officers don't return to the garage during their shift unless there's a mechanical problem, and Tom hadn't reported any issues. I called Tom's cell phone directly. It went straight to voicemail. Then I tried calling the sheriff, but his phone was busy. I tried the night supervisor, but his phone just rang and rang. I was starting to feel like I was the only person left in the county, sitting in this basement room with my radio and my growing sense that something was very wrong. Dispatch Unit 7. I'm at the front door of the house. I can hear movement inside, sounds like furniture being moved around. I'm going to announce myself. Copy, Unit 7. I listened as Sandra's voice became more distant, like she was moving away from her radio. I could hear her shouting through the static, "Police! Anyone inside the house, come to the front door with your hands visible." The response came back through the radio in Sandra's voice, but she sounded shaken. "Ray," someone answered me, a woman's voice from inside the house. She said, "Officer Vega, thank goodness you're here. He's in the back room, and I can't get him to leave." "Unit 7, did she identify herself?" "She said she was Ruth Hendricks and that this was her house." "Ray, I don't know what to do here. Either someone is pretending to be a dead woman, or what, Unit 7? Or I'm losing my mind." The static on the radio was getting worse, that rhythmic pattern becoming more pronounced. It almost sounded like breathing now, slow and deliberate. I decided to break protocol and leave the dispatch center to drive out to Old Mill Road myself. I couldn't reach any other units. Sandra was dealing with something I couldn't explain, and sitting in this basement listening to the static was making me feel like I was going crazy too. I locked up the dispatch center and headed for my patrol car. The night air was cold and damp, with that particular stillness that comes before a storm. The parking lot behind the courthouse was empty, except for my car and one other vehicle I didn't recognize, a dark sedan with no license plates. I made a mental note to check on it when I got back. But right now, Sandra needed backup more than I needed to worry about a suspicious car. The drive to Old Mill Road took me through the older part of the county, where the roads get narrow and the trees close in on both sides. I'd driven these roads thousands of times over the years, but tonight they felt different. Unfamiliar somehow, like the landmarks I'd memorized were shifting when I wasn't looking directly at them. Street signs seemed to be in the wrong places, and more than once I had to double-check my GPS to make sure I was going the right way. My radio crackled as I drove, that same rhythmic static, but now I was starting to hear voices in it, faint and distorted, like conversations happening in another room. I couldn't make out words, but the cadence was unmistakably human. I turned up the volume, but that just made the static louder without clarifying the voices. "Unit 7, this is Detective Morrison en route to your location. What's your current status?" "Ray? Thank God." I'm still at the front door of the house. The woman inside, she keeps talking to me through the door. She says the intruder is in her bedroom and she's afraid to confront him alone. She wants me to come inside and help her. "Unit 7, do not enter that house. I'm 5 minutes out." "Ray," she sounds so scared. And she knows things about the area, about people who used to live here. She mentioned the Kowalski family that used to live down the road, said she was worried about their daughter who's been having problems at school. But the Kowalskis moved away 3 years ago, and their daughter would be in college by now. That detail hit me harder than it should have. I remembered the Kowalski family. Nice people, had a daughter who was maybe 14 when they moved away. How would someone pretending to be Ruth Hendricks know about neighbors who had moved away years after her death? "Unit 7, maintain your position outside the house. Do not engage with the voice inside." "Ray, something's wrong with my radio. I'm getting interference and I keep hearing other voices. It sounds like dispatch calls, but not from our department. Different call signs, different protocols." I was hearing it too. Underneath the static, I could make out fragments of radio transmissions that didn't match our department's procedures. Call signs I didn't recognize. References to streets that didn't exist in our county. It was like our radio was picking up transmissions from somewhere else entirely. "Unit 7, I'm experiencing the same radio interference. Stay focused on the situation at hand." I turned onto Old Mill Road and immediately saw Sandra's patrol car parked in the driveway of 4847. But what I saw beyond it made me pull over and sit for a moment, trying to process what I was looking at. The house was exactly as Sandra had described. Lights on in the windows, warm yellow light that suggested someone was home and comfortable. The driveway was clean and well maintained, with no sign of the years of neglect I expected. And there was indeed a dark blue Buick parked near the house, looking like it had been driven recently. But I knew this house. I'd driven past it 6 months ago and it had been obviously abandoned. Broken windows, collapsed porch roof, weeds growing through the foundation. Now, it looked like someone had been maintaining it carefully for years. I got out of my car and walked toward Sandra's unit. She was standing near the front door of the house, her flashlight in one hand and her radio in the other. When she saw me approaching, the relief on her face was obvious. "Ray, I've never been so glad to see anyone in my life. This whole situation is..." She gestured toward the house. "It's not possible, but it's happening." "What's the current status?" The woman inside, she's still talking to me. She keeps asking me to come in and help her with the intruder. "But Ray, look at this house. Look at it and tell me, this is the same property that's been empty for 6 years." I looked. The house was a modest ranch-style home, probably built in the 1960s with white siding and green shutters. The porch light was on and I could see warm light coming from the front windows. There was a small garden beside the front steps with flowers that looked like they'd been recently watered. A newspaper lay on the front porch, as if it had been delivered that morning. "This isn't possible," I said. "I know, but Ray, there's more." I called in the license plate on the Buick. It comes back registered to Ruth Hendricks, expired registration from 2017. But the car looks like it's been driven recently. No dust, no weather damage. As if responding to our conversation, a voice came from inside the house. It was muffled but clearly audible. An elderly woman speaking with the kind of accent common to people who'd lived in this area their whole lives. "Officer Vega? Are you still out there? Please, I really need your help. He's being very aggressive and I'm afraid he might hurt me." Sandra looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Fear mixed with confusion and something else. A kind of desperate hope that there was a rational explanation for what we were experiencing. "Ray, what do I do? If there's really someone in there who needs help, but if there's not, if this is some kind of hallucination or psychological break..." The voice from inside the house spoke again, closer to the door now. "I can hear voices out there. Is someone with you, Officer Vega? Please, both of you come in. I have coffee on, and we can figure out what to do about this man in my bedroom." I looked at Sandra, then at the house, then back at Sandra. Everything about this situation violated my understanding of how the world worked. But we were police officers and someone inside was asking for help. "We go in together," I said. "We don't separate. We don't let anyone get between us and the exit. And at the first sign that something's not right, we leave immediately. Ray, something's already not right, but I agree." We approached the front door together. Sandra knocked firmly. "Mrs. Hendricks, this is Officer Vega with the Sheriff's Department. I have Detective Morrison with me. We're going to come in and help you, but I need you to step away from the door." "Of course, dear. Come right in. The door's unlocked." The front door opened easily, as if it had been recently oiled and maintained. The interior of the house was exactly what you'd expect from an elderly woman's home. Floral wallpaper, furniture that looked like it had been purchased in the 1980s, family photographs on every surface. The air smelled like coffee and something else, something sweet like baking cookies. It was warm and inviting and absolutely impossible. Ruth Hendricks was standing in the living room, and she looked exactly like I remembered her from when she was alive. Maybe 70 years old, gray hair and a neat perm, wearing a housecoat and slippers. She smiled when she saw us, the kind of grateful smile people give to police officers when they're genuinely relieved to see help arrive. "Officer Vega, thank you so much for coming. And you must be Detective Morrison. I've heard good things about you from the neighbors." I stared at her, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with what I knew to be true. This woman had been dead for 6 years. I'd seen her obituary. I'd driven past her empty, abandoned house. But here she was, looking exactly as she had in life, talking to us as if nothing unusual had happened. "Mrs. Hendricks," I said carefully, "can you tell us about the intruder?" "Oh, yes, he's in my bedroom. He came in through the back door maybe an hour ago. I was watching television when I heard the glass break. He's been going through my things, and when I asked him to leave, he became very belligerent." "Can you describe him?" "Middle-aged man, maybe 40 or 50, wearing dark clothing. He has a flashlight and he keeps shining it around the room like he's looking for something specific." Sandra and I exchanged glances. The description matched what she'd observed from outside. Someone with a flashlight moving around in the house. "Mrs. Hendricks, we're going to need you to wait in the living room while we check on the situation. Stay away from the bedroom until we've secured the area." "Of course, dear. You be careful now." He seemed very agitated. Sandra and I moved toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. The house had the same layout as most ranch homes from that era. Living room and kitchen in the front, bedrooms and bathroom in the back. As we approached the bedroom, I could hear sounds of movement inside, like someone going through drawers and closets. I drew my weapon and motioned for Sandra to do the same. We positioned ourselves on either side of the bedroom door, which was closed. "Police! Anyone in the bedroom, come out with your hands visible." The sound stopped. Then a voice answered from inside the room, muffled but clearly male. "I'm not armed. I'm coming out." The bedroom door opened, and a man stepped into the hallway with his hands raised. He was exactly as Mrs. Hendricks had described, middle-aged, wearing dark clothing, carrying a flashlight. But when I saw his face, I felt like I'd been hit in the stomach. It was Tom Bradley, the officer who was supposed to be working Unit 12. "Tom, what the hell are you doing here?" Tom looked at me with confusion and fear. "Ray? How did you get here? I've been trying to reach dispatch for hours. My radio's not working, and my cell phone has no signal. Tom, you're supposed to be patrolling the southern sector. Why are you in this house?" "I got a call about a break-in at this address. Someone reported seeing lights in an abandoned house and requested an officer to investigate. But when I got here, the place wasn't abandoned. This lady, Mrs. Hendricks, she let me in and said someone had broken into her bedroom. She asked me to check it out." Sandra was looking back and forth between Tom and me like she was watching a tennis match. "Tom," she said, "Mrs. Hendricks has been dead for 6 years." "What?" "No, she's not dead. She's right here in the house. She made me coffee." I looked back toward the living room. Ruth Hendricks was still there, standing near the couch, watching us with concern. "Tom, who called in the break-in?" "Dispatch did. You did, Ray. About 2 hours ago, you radioed me and said there was a report of suspicious activity at 4847 Old Mill Road." "I never called you, Tom. And according to my records, you haven't been responding to radio calls all night." Tom's confusion was obvious and genuine. "Ray, I've been responding to calls all night. I worked a domestic disturbance on Cedar Street, a traffic accident near the interstate, and then this call. I've been checking in with dispatch every hour like always. But I had no record of any of those calls. According to my log, Tom hadn't been heard from since the beginning of his shift. Tom, what time do you think it is right now?" He checked his watch. About 4:15 a.m. I checked mine. It was 4:15 a.m. What day is it? October 13th, 2023. That was correct too. I was starting to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. Tom was responding to calls I hadn't made. Mrs. Hendricks was alive when she should be dead, and we were all standing in a house that should have been empty and abandoned. "Mrs. Hendricks," I called out. "Can you come here for a moment?" She walked over to us, still looking concerned about the situation. "Mrs. Hendricks, what year is it?" 2023, of course. October 13th, to be specific. "And how long have you lived in this house?" "Oh, about 15 years now, ever since my husband passed. This is a good neighborhood, very safe. At least it was until tonight." "Mrs. Hendricks, do you remember anything about a car accident, an ice storm in February 2017? She looked puzzled. "Car accident? No, I don't recall any car accident. I'm a very careful driver." I looked at Sandra and Tom, both of whom were staring at me like I was the one who wasn't making sense. "Ray," Sandra said quietly, "maybe we should focus on securing the scene and figure out the rest later." She was right. Whatever was happening here, we had procedures to follow. Someone had reported a break-in, we'd found an intruder in the house, and we needed to sort out the details. "Tom, you're going to need to come with us to clear up this confusion about the dispatch calls." "Of course. But Ray, I don't understand what's confusing about it. I responded to your call." We escorted Tom outside, with Mrs. Hendricks following behind us. In the driveway, I could see all 3 patrol cars. Sandra's Unit 7, my detective car, and Tom's Unit 12. But Tom's car looked different than I remembered. Newer, cleaner, with equipment I didn't recognize. "Tom, when did the department upgrade your unit?" "Upgrade?" "This is the same car I've been driving for 2 years." I walked over to his patrol car and looked inside. The radio was a model I'd never seen before, with digital displays and features that weren't in our budget. The computer terminal was running software I didn't recognize. Even the seat configuration was different. "Sandra, look at this." She peered into Tom's car and frowned. "This isn't one of our vehicles. I mean, it's got our department markings, but the equipment is all wrong." "Tom, where did you get this car?" "From the motor pool, same as always." "Ray, are you feeling all right?" You're asking me questions like you don't know basic facts about our department. I was about to respond when my radio crackled, but instead of the rhythmic static I'd been hearing all night, there was a clear voice coming through. "All units, this is dispatch. We have reports of 3 patrol cars at 4847 Old Mill Road, but no officers have checked in from that location. Please respond." I grabbed my radio. "This is Detective Morrison. I'm at 4847 Old Mill Road with Officers Vega and Bradley." "Detective Morrison, we show no record of you being dispatched to that location. Please return to the station for debriefing." "Dispatch, who is this? I'm the night dispatcher." "Detective Morrison, this is Sergeant Rodriguez. You've been missing for 3 hours." I felt the ground shift under my feet. Sergeant Rodriguez worked days, not nights. And according to my watch, I'd only been away from the dispatch center for about an hour. "Sarge, what time do you show?" 7:30 a.m., Detective. You were supposed to end your shift at 7 o'clock. I looked at my watch again. It still showed 4:15 a.m. Sandra was listening to the radio conversation, and her face had gone pale. "Ray, something's very wrong here." Tom was looking back and forth between us with growing alarm. "What's wrong? What's happening?" Mrs. Hendricks had been standing quietly on her porch, but now she spoke up. "Officers, I think you should come back inside. There's something I need to show you." Against every instinct I'd developed in 28 years of police work, We followed Mrs. Hendricks back into the house. She led us to the kitchen, where she gestured toward a window that looked out over the backyard. "Look outside and tell me what you see." I looked through the kitchen window and saw what appeared to be a normal backyard. A small lawn, some flower beds, a tool shed, and beyond that, open pasture that stretched to a line of trees in the distance. It was the kind of rural property you'd find anywhere in our county. "I see your backyard, Mrs. Hendricks. Look more carefully. Look at the sky." I looked up and felt my stomach drop. The sky was wrong. Instead of the pre-dawn darkness I expected, it was a strange gray color, neither day nor night, and the light that was illuminating everything wasn't coming from any visible source. There was no sun, no moon, no stars, just that diffuse gray light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Sandra, Tom, are you seeing this?" They both looked out the window, and I could see the same confusion and fear on their faces that I was feeling. "Mrs. Hendricks," Sandra said, "what is this place?" "This is my home, dear, but I think you figured out by now that it's not quite the same as the world you came from." "What do you mean?" Mrs. Hendricks sat down at her kitchen table and gestured for us to join her. "You three aren't the first police officers to respond to calls at this address. Over the years, I've had quite a few visitors. Some stay for a few hours, some for a few days. Eventually, they all find their way back to where they belong." "Mrs. Hendricks," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "you died in a car accident in 2017. Yes, I suppose I did. But dying doesn't always mean the same thing as leaving, does it?" Tom was staring at her with obvious disbelief. "You're saying you're a ghost?" "I'm saying I'm still here. Whether that makes me a ghost or something else, I really couldn't say. I've never been dead before, so I don't have much experience with the proper terminology." She stood up and walked to the coffee pot, pouring 4 cups as if this were a perfectly normal social visit. "The thing is, officers, this place exists in between places. Your radio calls, your dispatch center, your patrol cars, they're all real, but they're real in a space that touches your world without quite being part of it. When you responded to calls tonight, you were responding to real emergencies, but the emergencies were happening here, in this in-between place." "That's impossible," Sandra said. "Is it? Think about your radio tonight, the static, the voices from other departments, the calls that didn't match your records. Think about Detective Morrison's dispatch center, how he couldn't reach anyone else in the department. Think about Officer Bradley's patrol car with equipment that doesn't exist in your department." She was right. Every detail she mentioned had been bothering me, but I'd been too focused on the immediate situation to see the larger pattern. "So, where are we exactly?" I asked. "You're in a place that exists for people who need to be somewhere else. Police officers who die on duty, dispatchers who spend their whole careers listening to other people's emergencies, people who dedicate their lives to helping others. Sometimes they end up here instead of wherever they're supposed to go next. Are we dead?" "No, I don't think so. I think you're just temporarily displaced. The radio frequencies that connect your world sometimes cross with the frequencies here, and when they do, people can slip from one place to the other without realizing it." Tom set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. "How do we get back?" "The same way you got here, through the radio calls. You respond to the calls, you help whoever needs help, and eventually you find your way back to your own world." "But the calls we've been responding to," Sandra said, "they're not from our department." "No, they're from here. From people who are stuck in this in-between place and need help moving on. Like the man who was in my bedroom tonight, he wasn't an intruder. He was a police officer from another department who's been here for several months, trying to find his way back to his own world." Where is he now? He left through the back door when he heard you coming. He doesn't trust other officers anymore. He's been here too long, and it's starting to affect his thinking. I thought about the radio static we'd been hearing all night, the rhythmic pattern that sounded almost like breathing. Mrs. Hendricks, how many people are here? I'm not sure. The place is bigger than it looks. Sometimes I hear voices from other houses, other neighborhoods that exist here. Sometimes I get phone calls from people I knew when I was alive. People who died years before I did. They're all looking for help, looking for someone to answer their calls. And that's what we're supposed to do? Answer calls until we find our way back? That's what the others have done. Some of them figure it out quickly, some take longer. The key is not to fight it, not to insist that this place can't exist. The more you try to apply the logic of your world to this place, the longer you'll be stuck here. My radio crackled again, and this time the voice was clear and urgent. All units, we have a 1054 at the intersection of Pine Street and Millbrook Avenue. Elderly male, possible cardiac arrest. Ambulance is en route, but we need an officer on scene for crowd control. I looked at Sandra and Tom. That's not a real intersection. Pine Street doesn't connect to Millbrook Avenue in our county. But it's a real call for help, Mrs. Hendricks said. Someone, somewhere in this place, needs assistance. Sandra picked up her radio. Dispatch, Unit 7, responding to Pine Street and Millbrook Avenue. Copy, Unit 7. Be advised, caller reports the victim is conscious but disoriented. Tom looked at me. Ray, what do we do? I thought about it. We could stay in Mrs. Hendricks' house, drinking coffee and trying to understand the impossible situation we'd found ourselves in. Or we could do what we'd been trained to do, respond to calls, help people who needed help, and trust that doing our job would eventually lead us back to where we belonged. We answer the call, I said. We do our job. The intersection of Pine Street and Millbrook Avenue turned out to be about 10 minutes away from Mrs. Hendricks' house, in a part of the county I'd never seen before despite 28 years of driving these roads. The streets were familiar in their basic layout, standard small-town infrastructure with sidewalks, streetlights, and modest homes set back behind small front yards. But the details were wrong. Street signs for roads I'd never heard of, businesses that didn't exist in our county. Even the style of architecture was subtly different from what I was used to. When we arrived at the intersection, there was indeed an elderly man lying on the sidewalk, conscious but clearly in distress. A small crowd had gathered around him, maybe 6 or 7 people who looked like ordinary citizens you'd encounter at any emergency scene. The strange thing was that none of them seemed surprised to see 3 patrol cars arrive for what should have been a routine medical call. Sandra took charge of crowd control while Tom and I assessed the situation. The man was probably in his 70s, well-dressed, alert, but obviously in pain. He kept clutching his chest and asking for his wife. "Sir, I'm Detective Morrison with the Sheriff's Department. Can you tell me your name?" "Harold Kessler. Is my wife here?" "I was walking to the store when the pain started. My wife, she'll be worried if I don't come home." "Mr. Kessler, the ambulance is on its way. Can you describe the pain you're experiencing?" "Like someone sitting on my chest. Started suddenly about 10 minutes ago. Standard symptoms of a possible heart attack." I'd worked dozens of similar calls over the years, but as I knelt beside Mr. Kessler, something about the situation felt off. The bystanders were maintaining a respectful distance, but they were watching us with an intensity that seemed unusual. Not the normal curiosity of people watching emergency responders work, but something more focused, like they were waiting for something specific to happen. "Detective," Sandra called out, "the ambulance is here." I looked up and saw an ambulance pulling up to the scene. But like Tom's patrol car, it looked different from the vehicles I was used to seeing. Newer, with equipment and markings I didn't recognize. 2 EMTs got out and approached us with professional efficiency. "What's the situation?" the lead EMT asked. "Elderly male, chest pain, possible cardiac event. He's conscious and alert, but experiencing severe chest pain for approximately 10 minutes. The EMTs began their assessment, but as they worked, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. One of the bystanders, a woman in her 50s wearing a blue jacket, kept staring at me with an expression of recognition. When our eyes met, she smiled and waved as if she knew me personally. "Detective Morrison?" she called out. "It's so good to see you again." I had no memory of ever meeting this woman, but something about her voice was familiar. She approached me with the confident manner of someone who expected to be remembered. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't think we've met." "Oh, but we have. You worked the accident scene when my car went off the bridge. February 14th, 2019. You were so kind to me, stayed with me until the ambulance arrived." February 14th, 2019. I remembered that accident. Valentine's Day, ice storm, a single car accident on the old bridge. But the driver had died at the scene. I'd stayed with the body until the coroner arrived, but there hadn't been anyone to comfort. "Ma'am, I think you might be confused about the details of that accident." "Am I? Or are you confused about which side of the accident you were on?" Before I could process what she meant by that, my radio crackled again. "All units, we have a domestic disturbance at 1247 Elm Street. Caller reports shouting and possible violence. Backup requested." Sandra looked at me. 1247 Elm Street. That's the same house number as Mrs. Hendrick's place, just a different street. "You think that's significant? In this place?" Everything seemed significant. The EMTs were loading Mr. Kessler into the ambulance. As they prepared to leave, he grabbed my hand. "Detective, thank you for staying with me. But I need to ask you something. My wife, Margaret, have you seen her? She was supposed to meet me at the store. Mr. Kessler will help you locate your wife once you're stable. She's been missing for 3 days now. I keep calling the police, but no one seems to have any record of my reports." The EMT interrupted. "Mr. Kessler, we need to get you to the hospital now." As the ambulance pulled away, I thought about what Mr. Kessler had said. Missing wife, police reports with no record. It was starting to sound like a pattern. "Detective Morrison," the woman in the blue jacket said, "you should answer that call on Elm Street. Sarah Chen needs help, and she's been waiting a long time. How do you know the caller's name?" "Because I know Sarah. She's been trapped in that house for weeks, trying to get away from her husband. But every time she calls for help, the officers who respond get confused about the address or lose their way. She's starting to think no one will ever come." Tom had finished dispersing the crowd and rejoined us. "Ray, we should respond to that domestic call." "Agreed, but I want to ask you something first. Do you remember working any calls in the past few months where the details didn't quite add up? Reports that weren't in the system? Addresses that seemed wrong? Witnesses who knew more than they should?" Tom thought for a moment. "Actually, yeah. About 6 weeks ago, I responded to a burglary call at a house that turned out to be empty and had been for sale for months. But the caller had given me specific details about stolen items, and when I got there, I could see evidence that someone had recently been living in the house. Fresh food in the refrigerator, warm coffee on the counter. Did you file a report?" "I tried to, but when I got back to the station, there was no record of the call coming in. My supervisor said I must have misheard the address." Sandra was listening to our conversation with growing alarm. "I've had calls like that too. missing persons who turned out to already be dead, accident scenes where the evidence didn't match the reported circumstances. I always assumed I was making mistakes, getting confused about details. What if we weren't making mistakes? What if we were responding to calls from this place, even before we realized we were here? The woman in the blue jacket was still standing nearby, listening to our conversation. Detective Morrison, you're starting to understand. The boundary between your world and this place isn't as solid as you think. Radio frequencies cross over, calls get mixed up, and sometimes officers respond to emergencies that are happening here instead of there. How long has this been going on? Years, decades maybe. Every police department has stories about calls that don't make sense, reports that disappear, officers who temporarily lose track of time or location. Most people just dismiss them as mistakes or equipment malfunctions. My radio crackled again, more urgent this time. All units, 1247 Elm Street, domestic violence in progress. Caller reports her husband is threatening her with a weapon. Immediate response required. We need to go, Sandra said. As we walked back to our patrol cars, the woman in the blue jacket called out to me one more time. Detective Morrison, when you get to Elm Street, remember that helping Sarah Chen isn't just about her. It's about all the people who are trapped here, waiting for someone to answer their calls. The more calls you answer, the clearer the path back to your world becomes. We drove to 1247 Elm Street in convoy, our 3 patrol cars moving through streets that continued to look familiar, yet wrong. The houses were the right style for our area, but the paint colors were different. The landscaping was subtly off, and the street signs referenced roads I'd never heard of. 1247 Elm Street was a modest 2-story house with a front porch and a small yard. Unlike Mrs. Hendrick's house, this one showed obvious signs of distress. Several windows were broken, the front door was hanging open, and we could hear shouting coming from inside. Female voice calling for help, Sandra noted as we approached the house. Male voice very aggressive, Tom added. We positioned ourselves around the house according to standard domestic violence protocols. Sandra and I approached the front door while Tom covered the back exit. The shouting inside was getting louder and more violent. Police, we're coming in. The front door was unlocked, and we entered with weapons drawn. The living room showed signs of a struggle. Overturned furniture, broken glass, personal belongings scattered across the floor. The shouting was coming from upstairs. Help me! Please, someone help me! He's going to kill me! We climbed the stairs quickly, following the sound of the woman's voice. It was coming from a bedroom at the end of the hallway. The door was closed, but we could hear a man's voice threatening violence. Sarah, open this door right now. You can't hide from me forever. Sandra positioned herself on one side of the door while I took the other. Police, open the door and come out with your hands visible. The man's voice stopped abruptly. Then we heard footsteps moving away from the door. Ma'am, this is the police. Are you injured? I'm okay, but he's got a gun. He's in the closet. Sandra and I entered the bedroom carefully. A woman was crouched behind the bed, and she looked exactly like someone who'd been terrorized for hours. Bruises on her face, torn clothing, obvious fear in her eyes. Ma'am, I'm Officer Vega. You're safe now. Where is the man with the gun? She pointed toward the closet. In there. He's been drinking all day, and when I tried to leave, he said he'd kill me before he'd let me go. I approached the closet door. Sir, this is Detective Morrison with the Sheriff's Department. Come out of the closet with your hands visible. No response. Sir, we know you're in there. Come out now and no one gets hurt. Still nothing. I opened the closet door quickly, weapon ready. The closet was empty except for clothes and shoes. No sign of anyone hiding inside. Ma'am, there's no one in the closet. Where else might he be? Sarah Chen looked confused. He was just there. I saw him go in there not 5 minutes ago. Sandra was checking under the bed and behind the dresser. Ray, there's nowhere else to hide in this room. Ma'am, what's your husband's name? David Chen. We've been married for 12 years, and he's never been violent before tonight. But he lost his job last week and he's been drinking more and more. Can you describe him? About 40 years old, maybe 5'10", brown hair. He was wearing a red shirt and jeans. I radioed Tom. Unit 12, have you seen anyone exit the back of the house? Negative. No one's come out the back. Sandra and I searched the entire house systematically. Every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. The house wasn't large, and there simply wasn't anywhere for a grown man to hide. But Sarah Chen insisted that her husband had been there moments before we arrived. Ma'am, is it possible your husband left the house before we got here? No, I would have heard the front door, and he couldn't have gone out the back because he was in the bedroom with me. We brought Sarah downstairs and had her sit on the couch while we tried to figure out what had happened. She was clearly traumatized, with physical evidence of abuse, but the person who had allegedly abused her seemed to have vanished into thin air. Sarah, I said gently, I need to ask you some difficult questions. Is it possible that your husband wasn't actually here tonight? What do you mean? Is it possible that the things you remember happening might not have happened exactly the way you remember them? She stared at me with a mixture of confusion and anger. Detective, I'm not crazy. My husband was here. He hit me. He threatened to kill me, and he was hiding in that closet when you arrived. Sandra sat down beside Sarah on the couch. Ma'am, we believe that you experienced something traumatic, but we can't find any sign of your husband being in this house tonight. Then where is he? We don't know, but we're going to help you figure this out. As if summoned by our conversation, my radio crackled again. All units, we have a missing person report. David Chen, age 42, last seen 3 days ago leaving his residence at 1247 Elm Street. Wife reports he left following an argument and hasn't returned. I looked at Sarah Chen, then at Sandra. Ma'am, did you report your husband missing 3 days ago? Missing? No, he's been here. He's been here drinking and getting more and more angry. Sarah, according to our records, you called in a missing person report 3 days ago saying your husband left after an argument and hadn't come back. She looked at me with complete bewilderment. That's not possible. He's been here the whole time. But even as she said it, I could see doubt creeping into her expression. The kind of doubt that comes when someone starts to question their own memories. Ma'am, what day is today? October 13th. What day did your husband lose his job? Last week, October 6th. And when did he start drinking heavily? Right after he lost his job. But detective, I'm telling you, he's been here in this house with me. Sandra and I stepped into the kitchen to talk privately. Ray, what do you think is happening here? I think Sarah Chen has been reliving the same traumatic event over and over. Her husband left 3 days ago, but in her mind, he's been here threatening her continuously since then. So, the domestic violence call we responded to was from someone who needed help processing a trauma that happened days ago, but feels like it's still happening now. And our job is to help her understand that she's safe, that the immediate threat is over. I think so. But Sandra, look around this house. Look at the evidence of a struggle in the living room, the broken windows, the damaged furniture. If David Chen left 3 days ago, who caused all this damage? We walked back into the living room and examined the scene more carefully. The overturned furniture, the broken glass, the scattered belongings, it all looked recent. But if David Chen had been gone for 3 days, The damage should have either been cleaned up or should show signs of aging. "Sarah," I called out, "when did the furniture get overturned?" "Tonight, during the fight." "And the broken windows?" He threw a bottle at the window when I tried to call for help. "Sarah, I need you to think carefully. Is it possible that the fight you remember from tonight actually happened 3 days ago, the night your husband left?" She sat quietly for a long moment, and I could see her struggling with the question. "Detective, I remember him being here tonight. I remember him threatening me, hitting me, chasing me upstairs. I remember hiding in the bedroom and calling for help." "And we heard you calling for help. We heard a man's voice threatening you. But when we searched the house, we couldn't find him. So, where did the voices come from?" "I think they came from your memory of what happened 3 days ago. In this place, traumatic memories can become so vivid that they feel like they're happening in real time." Sandra sat back down beside Sarah. "Ma'am, you've been through something terrible, but you're safe now. Your husband isn't here and he can't hurt you. But I can still hear his voice sometimes. Late at night when the house is quiet, I hear him shouting at me. That's normal after a traumatic experience, but those voices are just memories. They can't actually hurt you." My radio crackled one more time. "All units, missing person David Chen has been located. Subject was found deceased in his vehicle approximately 50 miles north of town. Apparent suicide. Family notification in progress." The three of us sat in silence for a moment, processing what we'd just heard. "Sarah," I said gently, "did you hear that radio transmission?" "Yes." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Your husband, he's not coming back. He can't hurt you anymore." She began to cry, but it wasn't the desperate fear she'd shown earlier. It was grief mixed with relief. "I think part of me knew," she said. "I think that's why I kept reliving that night, why I couldn't move past it. I was afraid he would come back, but I was also afraid he wouldn't." Sandra put her arm around Sarah's shoulders. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. What happens now? Now you start healing. You start moving forward." As we talked with Sarah Chen, helping her process the news about her husband's death, I began to understand something important about this place. It wasn't just a way station for displaced police officers. It was a place where people who were stuck in traumatic loops could work through their experiences with the help of people trained to handle crisis situations. Mrs. Hendricks had been right. Our job here was to answer calls and help people who needed help. But it wasn't just about helping them with immediate emergencies. It was about helping them find closure, helping them move past the experiences that were keeping them trapped between worlds. We stayed with Sarah Chen for another hour, helping her understand what had happened and connecting her with resources for trauma counseling. As we prepared to leave, she walked us to the front door. "Officers, thank you for coming. Thank you for helping me understand." "Sarah, are you going to be all right here by yourself?" "I think so. For the first time in days, I feel like I can breathe. Like the house isn't closing in on me." As we walked back to our patrol cars, I noticed something that hadn't been there when we arrived. Parked across the street was the same dark sedan with no license plates that I'd seen in the courthouse parking lot earlier in the night. "Sandra, Tom, do you see that car?" They both looked where I was pointing. "Yeah, I see it. Looks like the same car that was parked behind the courthouse when we started our shift," Sandra said. "You saw it too." "I noticed it because it looked out of place. Too new and too clean for someone to be parking it behind the courthouse at midnight." Tom was staring at the car with obvious recognition. "I've been seeing that car at every call I've worked tonight. always parked at a distance, always empty, but it's been following me around. We approached the sedan carefully. The windows were tinted, but as we got closer I could see that there was someone sitting in the driver's seat. A man in what appeared to be a police uniform. I tapped on the driver's side window. The window rolled down to reveal a man about my age, wearing a sheriff's department uniform that looked almost exactly like ours, but with subtle differences in the patches and equipment. "Good evening, officers. I'm Sergeant Murphy, Internal Affairs." Internal Affairs. That explained the unmarked car and the following around. But I'd never heard of a Sergeant Murphy in our department's IA division. "Sergeant, what's your interest in our activities tonight?" "Detective Morrison, I've been monitoring radio transmissions from this sector, and there have been some irregularities that require investigation." "What kind of irregularities?" "Officers responding to calls that aren't in the dispatch log, patrol units operating outside their assigned sectors, and reports of officers interacting with civilians who are listed as deceased in county records." He knew about Mrs. Hendricks, which meant he knew exactly what was happening to us. "Sergeant Murphy, are you here to help us or investigate us?" "Both, Detective. The situation you three have found yourselves in tonight isn't unique. Over the years, we've had several incidents where officers have temporarily crossed over into this parallel space. Most of them find their way back within 24 hours, but some what? Some get lost. They start to prefer this place to their regular duties. Here, every call is meaningful. Every response helps someone who truly needs help. In the regular world, you spend half your time on paperwork and bureaucracy. Here, you're actually making a difference." Tom spoke up. "Are you saying some officers choose to stay here?" "I'm saying some officers lose track of which world they belong in. After weeks or months of answering calls here, they start to forget about their real lives, their real responsibilities. What happens to them? They become permanent residents. They stop trying to get back to their own world, and eventually they can't get back even if they want to." Sandra looked alarmed. "How do we make sure that doesn't happen to us?" "You keep remembering who you are and where you belong. You keep track of how long you've been here, and you don't let yourself get too comfortable with the situation." "How long have we been here?" Sergeant Murphy checked his watch. "According to my timeline, you've been here for about 6 hours. In your world, it's been about 15 minutes. 15 minutes? But we've worked multiple calls, driven all over the county. Time moves differently here. You can spend days in this place and return to your world to find that only minutes have passed. It's part of what makes this place seductive for law enforcement officers. You can accomplish more here in a night than you could in a month of regular police work." My radio crackled, and I heard my own voice coming through the speaker. "All units, this is Detective Morrison at dispatch. We have a priority call, officer, down at the intersection of Highway 9 and County Road 15. All available units respond immediately." I stared at the radio. That's my voice, but I didn't make that call. "Detective, that call is coming from your world. One of your fellow officers is in trouble, and your department needs you back immediately." "How do we get back?" "The same way you got here, through the radio, but you have to want to go back more than you want to stay here." Tom looked confused. "Why wouldn't we want to go back?" "Think about tonight, Officer Bradley. Every call you responded to, you were able to help someone who genuinely needed help. You solved real problems. You made a real difference. When was the last time you felt that way about your regular police work?" I had to admit, Sergeant Murphy had a point. Tonight, despite the confusion and impossibility of our situation, I'd felt more useful than I had in months of routine police work. But our real lives, our real responsibilities, are waiting for you, but only if you choose to return to them. The radio call repeated, more urgent this time. All units, officer down, Highway 9 and County Road 15. Officer has been shot, ambulance en route, need immediate backup for suspect apprehension. Sandra grabbed her radio. Dispatch, Unit 7 responding to officer down call. But instead of our familiar dispatcher's voice, we heard something different. Static, then silence, then a voice I didn't recognize. Unit 7, we show no active units in your sector. Please identify your location. Dispatch, this is Unit 7, Officers Vega, Morrison, and Bradley. We're responding from the Elm Street area to assist with the officer down call. Unit 7, we have no record of Officers Vega, Morrison, or Bradley being on duty tonight. Please clarify your status. Sergeant Murphy was watching us with what looked like sympathy. Officers, you're caught between two radio systems. The call about the officer down is coming from your world, but your radios are still connected to this place. To get back, you have to find a way to reconnect with your own dispatch center. How do we do that? You have to stop answering calls from this place and start focusing on calls from your own world. But that means leaving behind the people here who still need help. As if to emphasize his point, my radio crackled again with a call from this place. All units, we have a child missing from 892 Oakwood Drive. 6-year-old girl, last seen playing in her backyard. Parents are requesting immediate assistance. I looked at Sandra and Tom. A missing child was the kind of call that every police officer responded to without question, regardless of jurisdiction or circumstances. We can't ignore a missing child, Sandra said. Even if it means staying here longer, Sergeant Murphy asked. Even if it means staying here forever, Tom replied. Sergeant Murphy nodded approvingly. That's what I hoped you'd say. Officers, the missing child call is your way back to your own world, but it's also a test. If you can help find that child while maintaining your connection to your own reality, you'll be able to return home. If you get lost in this case, you might never find your way back. What do you mean, maintain our connection to our own reality? Remember who you are, where you really work, who you're responsible to in your real lives. Don't let this place become more real to you than your actual world. The officer down call repeated from our world's radio system, but the missing child call from this place was also repeating, getting more urgent. Officers, we need to make a choice, I said. Do we respond to the officer down call in our world, or do we help find the missing child here? Sandra was already walking toward her patrol car. We help find the child. That's what police officers do. Tom nodded agreement. A missing kid takes priority over everything else. I looked at Sergeant Murphy. Will you still be here when we get back? I'll be here as long as you need me to be. But detective, remember what I told you. Don't lose track of who you are. As we drove toward 892 Oakwood Drive, I tried to hold on to the details of my real life. My name is Ray Morrison. I work for the Millbrook County Sheriff's Department. I've been a police officer for 28 years. I live in a small apartment on the west side of town. I have a cat named Murphy and a truck that needs new tires. But with every mile we drove deeper into this impossible place, those details felt less important than the missing child we were racing to find. 892 Oakwood Drive was a modest, single-story house with a large backyard that bordered on a wooded area. When we arrived, there were already several people gathered in the front yard. The parents, some neighbors, and what appeared to be family members. The scene had the frantic energy that always surrounds a missing child case. A woman in her 30s ran toward us as we got out of our patrol cars. She was crying and barely coherent, but I could make out the essential details. Her 6-year-old daughter, Emma, had been playing in the backyard around 4 p.m. When the mother called her in for dinner at 5:30, Emma was nowhere to be found. "We've searched everywhere," the mother said. "The backyard, the house, the neighbors' yards. She just vanished." The father, a man about the same age as his wife, was more composed but obviously struggling to maintain control. "Emma knows not to leave the yard without permission. She's never done anything like this before." Sandra was already organizing the search. "How long has she been missing?" "About 4 hours now." "Have you contacted anyone else? Other family members? Friends she might have gone to visit?" "We called everyone we could think of. No one has seen her." Tom was examining the backyard, looking for any clues about which direction Emma might have gone. The yard was surrounded by a chain-link fence, but there were several gates that provided access to the wooded area beyond. "Ma'am, was any of these gates left open?" "I don't think so. We always keep them latched because of Emma." But when Tom checked the gates, he found that one of them was not only unlatched, but was hanging open. Beyond the gate was a trail that led into the woods. "Looks like she might have gone into the woods," Tom called out. The mother became even more distressed. "She's afraid of the woods. She would never go in there alone, especially not when it's getting dark." I was about to suggest that we call for additional backup and search dogs when something caught my attention. Standing at the edge of the group of neighbors was a man I recognized. The same man who had been in Mrs. Hendrick's bedroom earlier, the one who had turned out to be Tom Bradley. But Tom was right here beside me, so who was this other person who looked exactly like him? "Sandra, look at that man over there, the one standing by himself near the street." She looked where I was pointing. "Ray, that looks like Tom." "I know, but Tom's right here." We both looked at Tom, who was examining the gate, then back at the man near the street. The resemblance was unmistakable, but there were subtle differences. This other Tom looked older, more tired, and he was wearing a slightly different uniform. "Tom," I called out, "do you see that man over there who looks like you?" Tom looked up from the gate and followed my gaze. When he saw his doppelganger, his face went pale. "Ray, what the hell is that?" The other Tom had noticed us looking at him and was walking toward us. As he got closer, the differences became more apparent. This Tom had more gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes, and a weary expression that suggested someone who had seen too much. "Officers," the other Tom said as he approached us. "I'm Sergeant Bradley with the Sheriff's Department. I've been working this missing child case for about 3 months now." "3 months," Sandra said. "But Emma's only been missing for 4 hours. From your perspective, yes. But I've been here longer than you have. Time moves differently for different people in this place. I've been searching for Emma for 3 months, but from her parents' perspective, she disappeared 4 hours ago." Tom stared at his older self with obvious shock. "You're me, aren't you? You're what I become if I stay here too long. I'm one possible version of you. I'm the Tom Bradley who got lost in this place and never found his way back. I've been here for, I'm not sure how long. Years, maybe. I keep responding to calls, helping people, but I can never quite finish any case completely." "What do you mean?" "I find missing children, but they disappear again before I can reunite them with their families. I solve crimes, but the perpetrators vanish before I can arrest them. I help people in crisis, but the crisis always returns. It's like being stuck in a loop where you can almost accomplish your mission, but never quite complete it." I was beginning to understand something disturbing about this place. "So, Emma is really missing, but you've been searching for her for months without finding her?" "I've found her dozens of times. In the woods, at the school, at other houses in the neighborhood. But every time I bring her back to her parents, something happens and she disappears again. The case resets, and I start the search over. Why can't you find your way back to your own world? Because I stopped remembering that I had a world to go back to. After months of searching for Emma, finding her became more important than anything else. I forgot about my real life, my real responsibilities, my real identity. Tom looked at his older self with horror. How do I avoid becoming you? Remember who you are. Remember that this case, as important as it is, isn't the only thing that matters. Remember that you have a life and a job and responsibilities in your own world. Sandra had been listening to this conversation with growing alarm. So if we search for Emma, we risk getting trapped here like you did. Yes, but if you don't search for her, she'll remain lost forever. And a 6-year-old child lost in the woods. Sergeant Bradley didn't need to finish the sentence. My radio crackled with the officer down call from our world again, more urgent than before. All units, officer down at Highway 9 and County Road 15. Officer critically wounded, suspect fled on foot into wooded area. Need all available units for search and apprehension. I looked at Sandra and Tom, then at Sergeant Bradley. We had 2 missing person cases. A child lost in the woods in this world, and a wounded officer somewhere in our world. Both required immediate response. Sergeant Bradley, is there a way to search for Emma while maintaining our connection to our own world? I don't know. I never figured out how to do it, but maybe you can. Tom, I said to the real Tom, what do you think? Can we search for Emma without losing ourselves? I think we have to try. But we need to keep talking to each other, keep reminding each other who we are and where we belong. Sandra nodded agreement. And we need to set a time limit. If we don't find Emma within a specific time frame, we stop the search and focus on getting back to our own world. How long? 1 hour. If we can't find her in 1 hour, we accept that we're not the officers who are meant to find her. Sergeant Bradley looked at us with something that might have been hope. That's the smartest approach I've heard. I wish I'd thought of it when I first got here. Sergeant, will you help us search? I'll help, but I won't make the same mistake I made before. I won't let finding Emma become more important than everything else. We organized the search systematically, dividing the wooded area into sections and maintaining radio contact with each other. Emma's parents wanted to join the search, but we convinced them to stay near the house in case she returned on her own. The woods behind 892 Oakwood Drive were dense and dark, with thick undergrowth that made movement difficult. There were several trails, some obviously maintained, and others that looked like they'd been created by animals or children playing. We each took a different trail, maintaining visual or radio contact with each other. I'd been searching for about 20 minutes when I heard a child's voice calling for help. It was faint and seemed to be coming from deeper in the woods, off the main trail. All units, I think I hear Emma calling for help. About half a mile into the woods, east of the main trail. Copy, Detective Morrison. We're converging on your location. I followed the sound of the voice through increasingly thick undergrowth. The voice seemed to be getting closer, but also more urgent, like a child who was genuinely frightened and calling for help. Emma? This is Detective Morrison with the police. Keep calling out so I can find you. Help me! I'm stuck and I can't get out. I pushed through a particularly dense patch of bushes and found myself in a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was what appeared to be an old well, partially covered by rotting wooden boards. The voice was coming from inside the well. Emma, are you down in the well? Yes, I fell in and I can't climb out. I approached the well carefully and shined my flashlight down into it. About 10 feet down, I could see a small figure sitting on a narrow ledge. It was definitely a child, and she appeared to be uninjured but frightened. "Emma, my name is Detective Morrison. I'm here to help you. Are you hurt?" "I hurt my ankle when I fell, but I think I'm okay." Sandra and Tom arrived at the clearing just as I was assessing the situation. "We need rope and probably a harness to get her out safely," Sandra said. "I've got rope in my patrol car," Tom said. "I'll go get it." While Tom went for the rope, Sandra and I talked to Emma to keep her calm and assess her condition. She was scared but alert, and she seemed to have only minor injuries from her fall. "Emma, how did you end up in the woods? Your parents said you never leave the backyard without permission." "I saw a puppy. It was cute and it looked lost, so I followed it to try to help it. But it kept running away, and I got lost trying to follow it." "Did you see where the puppy went?" "It disappeared when I fell in the well. I think maybe it was trying to lead me somewhere, but I don't know where." Tom returned with the rope and a basic harness. We rigged a simple pulley system using a sturdy tree branch and slowly hauled Emma up from the well. She was dirty and scared, but otherwise unharmed. "Emma, we're going to take you back to your parents now. They've been very worried about you." As we walked back through the woods toward her house, Emma chattered about the puppy she'd followed and how scary it had been in the well. She seemed remarkably resilient for a 6-year-old who had just spent 4 hours lost in the woods. But as we emerged from the wooded area and approached her backyard, something strange happened. The house began to flicker, like a television with bad reception. One moment it was there, solid and real, with Emma's parents waiting anxiously in the yard. The next moment it seemed translucent, and I could see through it to an empty lot with no house at all. "What's happening?" Sandra asked. "Emma," I said, kneeling down to her level, "I need to ask you something important. Do you remember falling into the well?" "Yes, it was scary." "Do you remember anything before that? Before you saw the puppy?" She thought for a moment, her face scrunched up in concentration. "I remember playing in the backyard. Mommy called me for dinner, but I wanted to keep playing. And then what? And then I think I had a bad dream. In the dream, I got lost in the woods and fell in a well, and nobody could find me." The house flickered again, and this time it stayed translucent. I could see Emma's parents in the yard, but they looked different. Older, more tired, wearing black clothes like they were attending a funeral. "Emma," I said gently, "what if it wasn't a dream? What if you really did get lost in the woods? But you found me, so I'm not lost anymore. But what if you got lost a long time ago, and you've been lost ever since?" She looked at me with the kind of confusion that children show when adults are trying to explain something too complicated for them to understand. "I don't understand." Sergeant Bradley appeared beside us, having followed our trail back from the woods. "Detective Morrison, she's been lost for 3 months. Not 4 hours, not one night, 3 months." "What do you mean?" "Emma disappeared from her backyard 3 months ago. Her parents have been searching for her ever since. The house you see flickering, that's the real house where her real parents are holding a memorial service for their missing daughter." I looked at the child beside me, so alive and present and real. But she's right here. She's here because she doesn't understand that she's lost. In her mind, she just went exploring in the woods and had a scary adventure. She doesn't realize that she never made it home. So, what are we supposed to do? Help her understand. Help her remember what really happened. And help her find her way to wherever children go when they can't find their way home. Emma was listening to our conversation with growing alarm. "I want to go home now. I want my mommy and daddy. Emma, Sandra said, kneeling down beside her. "We're going to help you get home. But first, I need you to think very carefully about the puppy you followed into the woods. It was brown and white, and it looked friendly. And where did you first see it?" "In my backyard. It was sniffing around the fence." "What happened when you tried to pet it?" Emma's expression became uncertain. I reached for it, and then what?" "And then I think I fell down. There was a hole in the ground near the fence, and I fell into it." The house flickered one more time, and then became solid again. But now it looked different. Older, more weathered, with overgrown landscaping and boarded-up windows. The parents in the yard were gone. "Emma," I said, "what if the hole you fell into wasn't in your backyard? What if it was the well in the woods? But how did I get from my backyard to the woods? What if the puppy you followed wasn't real? What if it was something your mind created to help you understand what happened?" She looked at me with the devastating clarity that children sometimes have. "Are you saying I'm dead?" "I'm saying you're lost, and you've been lost for a long time. But being lost doesn't mean you're dead. It just means you need help finding your way to where you're supposed to be." "Where am I supposed to be?" Sandra took Emma's hand. "We don't know exactly, but we know it's not here, in this in-between place where things are confusing and nothing quite makes sense." "Will I see my mommy and daddy again?" "I think so, but maybe not in the way you expect." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing what we told her. Then she said, "If I'm lost and you found me, can you help me get unlost?" "We're going to try." Tom had been listening to this conversation while monitoring our radio. "Ray, we're getting that officer down call again, more urgent than before. How much time do we have left on our 1-hour limit?" "About 15 minutes. I looked at Emma, then at Sergeant Bradley. "Sergeant, you've been searching for Emma for 3 months. Have you ever figured out how to help her move on?" "Number. Every time I get close to understanding what she needs, the case resets and we start over." "What if the problem isn't that you can't solve the case? What if the problem is that you're not the right person to solve it?" "What do you mean?" "You said you've been here for years, responding to cases but never quite completing them. What if you've been trying to solve the wrong cases? What if your real job here isn't to find Emma but to help other officers avoid getting trapped like you did?" Sergeant Bradley stared at me. "You think my purpose here is to be a warning. I think your purpose here is to help officers like us learn how to help people without losing ourselves in the process. And Emma? Maybe Emma's case can only be solved by officers who are still connected to their own world. Officers who can help her understand the difference between being lost in this place and being lost in the real world." Emma tugged on my sleeve. "Detective Morrison, if I'm lost, can you call my real mommy and daddy and tell them where I am?" I looked at my radio. The officer down call from our world was getting more urgent, but there was something else coming through the static. A different call in a woman's voice. "All units, we have a missing child case at 892 Oakwood Drive. 6-year-old Emma Matthews, missing for 3 months. Parents are requesting any updates on the search. Emma Matthews." I looked at Emma, and she nodded. "That's my real name, Emma Matthews." "Emma, that call is coming from our world. Your real parents are still looking for you. Can you tell them I'm okay?" "We can try, but Emma, to do that, you might have to let go of this place. You might have to stop being lost here so that you can be found there." "I don't understand." Sandra knelt down beside Emma again. "Emma, when people get lost in the woods, sometimes they have to stop walking around in circles and stand still so that the people looking for them can find them. You want me to stand still? We want you to stop trying so hard to get back to your house here and trust that your real parents are looking for you in the real world. But what if they can't find me? Then we'll help them. But first, you have to let go of this place." Emma looked around at the flickering house, the empty yard, the woods where she'd been lost for 3 months. "How do I let go?" "Close your eyes," I said. "Think about your real house, your real parents, your real bedroom with your real toys. Think about the last thing you remember before you got lost." Emma closed her eyes and concentrated. "I remember playing with my dolls in the backyard. Mommy called me for dinner. I was going to go inside, but then I saw something by the fence." "What did you see?" "A hole, like someone had been digging. I went to look at it, and I fell in." As Emma described her real memory, the flickering house began to fade completely. The woods around us also started to become translucent, and I could hear sounds from our world coming through the radio more clearly. "All units, officer down, Highway 9 and County Road 15. Officer critically wounded, need immediate medical assistance." "Emma," I said, "I think it's time for you to go home. Will you come with me?" "We can't. We have to go back to our own world. But Emma, when you get home, tell your parents that you're safe. Tell them that some police officers helped you find your way." "I will." Emma opened her eyes, and she looked different. More solid, more present, but also like she was already beginning to fade from this place. "Thank you for finding me," she said. "Thank you for letting us help you get unlost." Emma smiled, and then she was gone. Not disappeared exactly, but gone in the way that dreams fade when you wake up. One moment she was there. The next moment we were standing in an empty clearing in the woods with no sign that she'd ever been there. My radio crackled with a clear signal from our world. "All units, this is Detective Morrison at dispatch. Officer down, Highway 9 and County Road 15. All available units respond immediately." That was my voice, but it was coming from the dispatch center in our world. "Ray," Sandra said, "I think it's time to go home." Tom nodded. "I think Emma showed us how. We have to let go of this place and trust that our real world is looking for us." Sergeant Bradley was still with us, watching as we prepared to leave. "Officers, thank you. For the first time in years, I feel like I helped complete a case." "Sergeant, what will you do now?" "I think I'll keep helping other officers who get lost here. Help them find their way back before they make the same mistakes I made." "Are you sure you don't want to try to get back to your own world?" He shook his head. "I've been here too long. This is my world now. But knowing that Emma found her way home, that's enough for me." We said goodbye to Sergeant Bradley and walked back through the woods toward our patrol cars. But instead of emerging at 892 Oakwood Drive, we found ourselves back at Mrs. Hendricks' house. Mrs. Hendricks was waiting for us on her porch, smiling like she'd expected us to return. "Officers, did you help the people who needed help?" "We tried to," I said. "Then you're ready to go home." "Mrs. Hendricks, what about you? Don't you want to move on too?" "Oh, I think I will, eventually. But right now I'm needed here. There are always officers who get lost between worlds, and someone needs to be here to offer them coffee and explain what's happening." She handed each of us a cup of coffee, just like she had hours earlier. But this time the coffee tasted different. Familiar, like the coffee from the dispatch center in our world. "Mrs. Hendricks, thank you for everything. Thank you for remembering that your job isn't just to help people, but to find your way back to the people who need you in your own world." We got into our patrol cars, and I picked up my radio. "Dispatch, this is Detective Morrison, Officers Vega and Bradley responding to Officer Down call at Highway 9 and County Road 15. Copy, Detective Morrison. Be advised, Officer Jackson has been shot in the leg, but is conscious and alert. Suspect fled into wooded area east of the highway. The voice was familiar. Our regular night dispatcher, not the voice I'd been hearing from the other world. ETA approximately 10 minutes. As we drove toward Highway 9, I could see the first light of dawn beginning to appear on the horizon. According to my watch, it was 6:45 a.m., which meant our shift was almost over, but according to the radio, it was still the middle of the night. Sandra, Tom, what time do you show? 6:45 a.m., Sandra replied. But the radio traffic suggests it's still nighttime. Maybe time really does move differently between the two places. When we arrived at the scene of the officer down call, we found Officer Jackson sitting in his patrol car with a bandage around his leg. He was alert and talking to the EMTs who were treating his wound. Jackson, what happened? Routine traffic stop turned into a shooting. Subject fled on foot into the woods about 20 minutes ago. I called for backup, but dispatch said all units were busy with other calls. We're here now. Can you describe the suspect? White male, maybe 30 years old, wearing dark clothing. He had a handgun, probably a .38. Tom was already organizing a search of the wooded area. Ray, this feels familiar. Like we've done this before? Like we know how to do this because we just spent the night learning how to search for people in the woods. The search for the suspect took about an hour, but we found him hiding in a drainage ditch about half a mile from the highway. He surrendered without further incident, and we were able to recover his weapon. As we processed the arrest, I realized something important. The skills we developed during our night in the other world, the careful communication, the systematic search procedures, the ability to stay focused while dealing with impossible situations, had made us better at our real job. Sandra, Tom, how do you feel about the night we just had? Like it was the most important training we've ever received, Sandra said. Like we learned something about why we became police officers in the first place, Tom added. Do you think it really happened? I think it doesn't matter whether it really happened. What matters is that we helped people who needed help, and we learned how to do our job better. Our shift ended at 7 a.m., and as I walked back to the dispatch center to complete my paperwork, I thought about Mrs. Hendricks and Sergeant Bradley and Emma Matthews. Were they real people we'd helped? Or were they manifestations of our own need to find meaning in our work? I decided it didn't matter. What mattered was that we'd answered every call, we'd helped everyone who needed help, and we'd found our way back to where we belonged. As I sat down at my desk in the dispatch center, I noticed something that made me smile. On my desk was a cup of coffee, still warm, with a note beside it. Thank you for everything. Mrs. H. Double quote. I picked up the coffee and took a sip. It tasted exactly like the coffee Mrs. Hendricks had served us in her impossible house between worlds. Maybe the night had been real after all. Or maybe that wasn't the right question to ask. Maybe the right question was, when the next impossible call comes through the radio, will we be ready to answer it? I finished my coffee, completed my paperwork, and went home to my small apartment on the west side of town. My cat Murphy was waiting for me, as always, and my truck still needed new tires. But something had changed. For the first time in years, I felt like I remembered why I'd become a police officer. Not for the authority or the excitement, but for the opportunity to help people when they needed help most. And I knew that the next time the radio crackled with an impossible call from an impossible place, I'd be ready to answer it. Because that's what police officers do. We answer the calls, all of them. Even the ones that don't make sense. Even the ones that take us places we never expected to go. Even the ones that teach us who we really are. 6 months later, I was working another night shift when the radio crackled with static. That familiar rhythmic pattern, like breathing, like Morse code that almost made sense but never quite resolved into anything you could understand. In the time since our experience in the between world, things had changed at the department. Sandra had been promoted to detective and was working more complex cases with a confidence I'd never seen in her before. Tom had requested additional training in search and rescue operations and had become our go-to officer for missing person cases. And me? I'd started keeping a different kind of log, noting the calls that didn't quite make sense, the officers who temporarily lost radio contact, the cases that seemed to resolve themselves in ways that defied explanation. I'd also started paying closer attention to the coffee in the dispatch center. Every few weeks, I'd come in to find a fresh pot brewing with a note that simply said, "For the night shift." No one ever claimed responsibility for making it, but it always tasted exactly like the coffee Mrs. Hendricks had served us in her impossible kitchen. Dispatch, this is Unit 15. I'm getting some weird radio interference, and I think I might be lost. Unit 15 was Officer Martinez, a rookie who'd joined the department just a month earlier. Maria Martinez, 26 years old, former EMT who'd decided to become a police officer after losing too many patients she felt she could have saved if she'd gotten to them sooner. Good instincts, eager to help, the kind of officer who always volunteered for the difficult calls. The kind of officer who would follow a welfare check call into places that didn't exist on any map. Unit 15, what's your location? I'm not sure. I was responding to a welfare check, but now I can't find the address, and the streets don't look familiar. Detective Morrison, are you familiar with Sycamore Lane? It's supposed to be in the northern sector, but my GPS shows nothing. I pulled up the county street directory on my computer. No Sycamore Lane in our jurisdiction. No Sycamore Lane in any of the neighboring counties either. Unit 15, there's no Sycamore Lane in our database. Can you describe your surroundings? Rural area, older houses, lots of trees. The streetlights look different than what we usually have. They're more like old-fashioned lampposts. And detective, the weird thing is, everything looks normal except nothing matches what I know about our county. I smiled and picked up the microphone, remembering how confused and frightened I'd been 6 months earlier when reality started shifting around me. Unit 15. This is Detective Morrison. I'm going to help you through this. First, I need you to stay calm and remember who you are and where you belong. Detective Morrison, I think I might be going crazy. I just met an elderly woman who's supposed to be dead, and she served me coffee and told me I was in an in-between place. She knew my name, knew about my background as an EMT, and she said I was there because someone needed help. Mrs. Hendricks was still there, still serving coffee to lost officers, still explaining the impossible with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world. I wondered if she remembered Sandra and Tom and me, or if each group of officers was a new experience for her. Unit 15, you're not going crazy. You're exactly where you need to be. The woman you met, was her name Mrs. Hendricks? Yes, Ruth Hendricks. She said she'd been waiting for someone like me, someone with medical training. Detective, how did you know that? Because I've been there, Officer Martinez. I know exactly what you're experiencing. Now, tell me about the welfare check call. Who asked you to respond? That's just it, Detective. There's no record of the call in dispatch, but someone definitely needs help. Mrs. Hendricks said there's a man about 2 streets over who's been having chest pains for hours but is too proud to call for an ambulance. She said he lives alone and doesn't trust hospitals, but he might trust a police officer who used to be an EMT. That was new. In our experience, the calls had been about existing emergencies. Mrs. Hendricks dealing with an intruder. Sarah Chen trapped in her traumatic loop, Emma Matthews lost in the woods. But this sounded like Mrs. Hendricks was actively recruiting Officer Martinez for a specific case that required her particular skills. Officer Martinez, do you remember your training as an EMT? Do you remember why you became a police officer? Yes, sir. I wanted to help people, but I wanted to be able to respond to situations before they became medical emergencies. I wanted to be the person who could intervene early, maybe prevent some of the tragedies I saw as an EMT. Then help them, Officer Martinez. Answer the call, help whoever needs help, and remember that your job is to find your way back to the people who need you in your own world. But Martinez, I need you to listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. I'm listening, Detective. You're in a place that exists between our world and somewhere else. Time moves differently there, and the rules of reality are more flexible. You can help people there, and you should help people there, but you have to remember that you belong here in our world, with our department. How do I remember that? Keep talking to me. Check in every 30 minutes, tell me what you're doing, who you're helping, and don't let yourself get too comfortable there. The moment you start thinking that the between world is more important than our world, you risk getting stuck there permanently. Detective, have other officers gotten stuck there? I thought about Sergeant Bradley, the older version of Tom who had been searching for Emma Matthews for months, who had given up trying to return to his own world. Yes, some officers find that place so fulfilling, so meaningful, that they forget about their real lives. They become permanent residents, helping other lost officers but never finding their way home. What about you, Detective? How did you get back? We helped a little girl find her way home, and in the process, we learned how to find our own way home. The key is remembering that helping people in the between world is important, but so is returning to help people in our world. Copy that, Detective. I'm going to go check on this man with chest pains. I'll radio in again in 30 minutes. Unit 15. One more thing. If you meet any other officers there, especially a Sergeant Bradley, tell him that Detective Morrison sends his regards and that Emma Matthews made it home safely. Will do, Detective. The radio fell quiet, and I settled in to wait for Officer Martinez's next check-in. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the mysteriously appearing pot, and noticed that tonight it tasted different, slightly sweeter, with a hint of cinnamon, like the kind of coffee you'd serve to someone who was about to face a difficult challenge. 30 minutes later, right on schedule, Officer Martinez's voice crackled through the radio. Dispatch, Unit 15 checking in. I found the man Mrs. Hendricks told me about. Harold Peterson, 78 years old, diabetic with a history of heart problems. He'd been having chest pains for about 6 hours, but was afraid to call for help because he couldn't afford another hospital bill. What's his condition? Stable now. I was able to convince him to let me check his vitals and give him his heart medication that he'd been skipping to make it last longer. His pain has decreased significantly, and his color is better. But Detective, here's the strange part. While I was with him, he told me about his granddaughter who lives in our county, lives at 1847 Pine Street. I checked the address. 1847 Pine Street was a real address in our jurisdiction, in the southern sector. That's a real address, Martinez. What about the granddaughter? Mr. Peterson said she's been calling him every day for the past month, worried because he hasn't been answering his phone. He said his phone was shut off because he couldn't pay the bill, but he's been too proud to tell her. He asked me to call her and let her know he's okay. Did you get her number? Yes. And Detective, when I called her from Mr. Peterson's landline, she was real. She answered immediately, said she'd been frantically worried about her grandfather. She's driving up from our county tomorrow to check on him and help him with his bills. this was different from our experience. Officer Martinez wasn't just helping someone in the between world. She was facilitating a connection between the between world and our real world. The granddaughter existed in our reality, but her grandfather existed in the space between worlds. Martinez, that's excellent work. How do you feel about the experience so far? Honestly, Detective, it feels more real than most of the calls I've worked in our world. Mr. Peterson really needed help, and I was able to provide exactly the kind of help he needed. Mrs. Hendricks said there are other people in the area who need assistance, people who've been overlooked or forgotten. That was the danger. The sense that the work in the between world was more meaningful, more direct, more immediately helpful than the routine police work in our reality. Officer Martinez, remember what I told you about staying grounded in our world. The work you're doing there is important, but so is the work we do here. I understand, Detective, but can I ask you something? When you were there, didn't you feel like you were finally doing the job you'd always wanted to do? Helping people who really needed help? Making a real difference? Yes, I did. And that's exactly why you need to be careful. The between world can become addictive for people in our profession. It offers everything we wish our regular job could be: meaningful calls, grateful citizens, immediate results. But Martinez, think about why you became a police officer in the first place. To help people before situations became critical. And where are most of the people who need that kind of help? In our world, in our county. Exactly. The between world is important, but it's not a replacement for our real responsibilities. Copy that, Detective. Mrs. Hendricks mentioned there's one more person who needs help tonight, and then she said I should be ready to return home. Something about a young woman who's been in a car accident but is afraid to go to the hospital because she's undocumented and worried about being reported to immigration. That sounded like exactly the kind of case Officer Martinez would excel at. Her EMT background and her natural empathy would be perfect for helping someone who was both medically and emotionally vulnerable. Martinez, help her. But remember 30-minute check-ins and don't let yourself think that this work is more important than your regular duties. Understood, Detective. As I waited for Martinez's next check-in, I thought about the pattern I was seeing. Mrs. Hendricks seemed to be matching officers with cases that specifically suited their skills and backgrounds. Sandra, Tom, and I had been given cases that taught us about working together and maintaining our connection to reality. Officer Martinez, with her medical background, was being given cases that required both law enforcement and medical skills. It made me wonder, was Mrs. Hendricks consciously training officers, or was the between world itself somehow responsive to what each officer needed to learn? 45 minutes passed before Martinez's next radio call came through, 15 minutes later than scheduled. Dispatch Unit 15. Sorry for the delayed check-in. The situation with the car accident victim was more complicated than expected. What's your status, Martinez? Maria Santos, 23 years old, undocumented immigrant from El Salvador. She'd been in a minor car accident about 4 hours ago, but left the scene because she was afraid of being arrested. She's been walking along back roads trying to get home, but she's more injured than she initially realized. Possible concussion, definitely needs medical attention. Were you able to help her? Yes, but, Detective, it took longer than I expected because I had to convince her that I wasn't going to report her immigration status. She was so scared, and she kept trying to leave even though she was clearly disoriented from the head injury. What's her current condition? I finally convinced her to let me drive her to the hospital. But Detective, here's the thing. The hospital she needed to go to was in our world, not in the between world. Mrs. Hendricks gave me directions to a place where the two worlds connect, and I was able to drive Maria directly to County General. You brought someone from the between world into our world? I think so. When we got to the hospital, everything looked normal. Regular emergency room, staff I recognized, standard procedures. Maria was admitted for observation and treatment of her concussion. But Detective, when I tried to go back to the between world, I couldn't find the way. What do you mean? I mean, I'm back in our world now, sitting in the parking lot of County General. My patrol car, my equipment, everything is normal, but I don't remember driving here from wherever I was before. I felt a mixture of relief and concern. Relief that Officer Martinez had returned safely to our world, but concern about the implications of her experience. If she had successfully brought someone from the between world into our reality, what did that mean about the relationship between the two worlds? Martinez, can you confirm your location for me? County General Hospital, East Parking Lot. Detective, I need to ask you something. Is Maria Santos real? I mean, will she still be in the emergency room if I go check? Only one way to find out. Go inside and inquire about her status. 10 minutes later, Martinez radioed back. Detective, Maria Santos is real. She's in the emergency room being treated for a concussion and some minor injuries from a car accident. The medical staff says she was brought in by a police officer about an hour ago, but there's no record of which officer or which department. How is she doing? She's going to be fine. Mild concussion, some bruises and scrapes, but nothing serious. And, Detective, the hospital social worker is helping her with her immigration concerns. Apparently, there are protections for crime victims and people who cooperate with law enforcement. That's good to hear. Martinez, I need you to return to the station for debriefing. Copy that. But Detective, before I sign off, I wanted to tell you something. Mrs. Hendricks asked me to give you a message. What message? She said to tell you that the coffee you've been finding in the dispatch center is her way of saying thank you. She said that officers like you, who learn how to help people in both the worlds without losing themselves, are what keep the balance between the worlds stable. Did she say anything else? She said that more officers will probably find their way to the between world in the coming months, and she hopes you'll continue to help guide them home. She called you a bridge between the worlds. A bridge between the worlds. I liked that description. It suggested that our experience hadn't been a one-time anomaly, but rather part of a larger pattern of connection and mutual assistance between our reality and the space where lost souls wait for help. Martinez, one final question. Are you glad you went there? Yes, Detective. I feel like I learned something important about why I became a police officer, but I'm also glad to be back. There's important work to do here, too. Copy that, Unit 15. Return to station when you're ready. As I ended my radio contact with Officer Martinez, I realized that our experience in the between world had given me a new role in the department. I was becoming the person who understood the impossible calls, who could guide other officers through experiences that defied rational explanation. Over the next few months, I received similar calls from other officers. Reports of radio interference, impossible addresses, meetings with people who should have been dead. Each time, I was able to help them navigate their experience, help them complete their mission in the between world while maintaining their connection to our reality. The coffee continued to appear in the dispatch center, always with a different flavor, always perfectly timed for when an officer needed guidance about a call that didn't make sense. And sometimes, late at night when the radio was quiet, I could hear that familiar rhythmic static, not threatening or confusing anymore, but almost like a heartbeat, reminding me that there were always people who needed help, in all worlds. I never saw Mrs. Hendricks again, but I felt her presence in the work we did. Every officer who successfully returned from the between world came back changed, more compassionate, more dedicated, more aware of the real purpose behind the badge they wore. Sandra was right when she said our experience had been the most important training we'd ever received. But I was beginning to understand that it wasn't just training, it was a calling. Some officers are meant to serve as bridges between worlds, helping both the living and the lost find their way to where they belong. And sometimes, late at night in the dispatch center, when I'm sipping coffee that tastes like home and listening to the radio chatter of officers doing their jobs in our ordinary, extraordinary world, I smile and think about Mrs. Hendricks serving coffee to another lost officer, explaining patiently that some calls take us places we never expected to go. Because that's what police officers do. We answer the calls, all of them, even the impossible ones, especially the impossible ones. Because sometimes the most important part of finding your way home is helping someone else find theirs.